The telegram arrived on a Tuesday, and with it, Clara Whitmore's life ended. Not literally, though sometimes she wished it had been that clean. No, this was worse. This was the kind of death where you kept breathing, kept walking, kept existing while everything that made you slowly drained away. Her sister was dead. Her father had made arrangements. She would go west and marry a man she'd never met, a widower, a mine owner, a stranger who needed a wife like he needed another piece of equipment. The decision was already made. Clara was simply the replacement part being shipped across the country. If you want to see how a woman fights back when everyone's already signed away her future, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The telegram had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had begun to tear. Clara held it in her hands now, sitting in the cramped corner of a rattling train car, watching the eastern cities give way to endless plains. The words hadn't changed, though she kept reading them as if they might. Elizabeth deceased, stop arrangements made, stop, you depart. Thursday. Stop. Grayson expects you. End of month, stop. Father. 12 words, that's all it took to dismantle 22 years of life. She pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching her reflection shimmer against the darkening landscape. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon she couldn't see, was a town called Deadridge. A man named Harold Grayson. A house that had belonged to her sister. A life that was supposed to be Elizabeth's. And now it was hers. Except it wasn't hers at all. You look like you're heading to a funeral, not a wedding. Clara turned sharply. The woman across from her was perhaps 60, with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog everything. She'd boarded in Chicago and hadn't spoken a word for 3 hours. Perhaps both, Clara said quietly. The woman's thin mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Mail-order bride? Something like that. Clara's fingers tightened on the telegram. Though I suppose the technical term is replacement wife. Ah, the woman settled back against her seat. Widower? Yes. How long? I don't know. The telegram didn't say. Clara's voice came out harder than she intended. It didn't say much of anything, really, just where to go and when to arrive. The woman studied her for a long moment. You could get off at the next station, go somewhere else, change your name. The thought had crossed Clara's mind approximately 700 times since Thursday. She'd counted the stations they'd passed, calculated the money in her small purse, inherited from her mother the only thing that was truly hers, and imagined stepping off the train into a different life. But she always came back to the same cold mathematics. No money, no connections, no skills that anyone would pay for. And behind her in Philadelphia, a father who'd made it clear that Clara's continued existence under his roof was a burden he'd no longer bear. Where would I go? Clara asked, and heard the defeat in her own voice. Anywhere. The woman leaned forward slightly. I've been riding trains for 40 years, girl. I've seen women head west for all sorts of reasons. Gold, land, love, desperation. The ones who survive are the ones who remember they're still people, not property. You remember that when you get to Deedridge. Before Clara could respond, the woman stood, gathered her small carpet bag, and moved to a different car without another word. Clara turned back to the window, but now she could only see her own reflection staring back. Dark hair that had once been carefully curled, now limp from days of travel. Gray eyes that looked older than 22, a face that resembled Elizabeth's enough to make the arrangement convenient. That's what she was. Convenient. Mshet. The train journey took 6 days. 6 days of watching the world transform from cobblestone streets and brick buildings to wooden towns that looked like they'd been thrown together in a hurry and might blow away in the next strong wind. 6 days of eating stale bread and hard cheese because the dining car was too expensive. 6 days of rehearsing conversations she'd never have, imagining versions of her arrival where she said no, turned around, claimed her own life. But when the train finally pulled into a dusty station with a weathered sign that read Deadridge Junction, Clara stepped off with her 2 small trunks and the certain knowledge that she'd run out of track. There was nowhere else to go. The platform was nearly empty. A few men loaded cargo onto a freight car. A young boy hawked newspapers that were probably weeks old. And standing near a black coach with gold lettering on the door was a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and expensive suits. He didn't approach her. He simply waited, hands clasped behind his back, while a younger man, some kind of assistant, Clara guessed, hurried forward. "Miss Whitmore?" The assistant was perhaps 30, with a nervous energy that made him seem younger. "I'm Mr. Dalton, Mr. Grayson's secretary. Welcome to Deadridge. May I take your trunks?" "I can manage one," Clara said, though her arms ached from carrying them off the train. "Nonsense. Mr. Grayson insists." Dalton gestured to a porter, who collected both trunks with practiced efficiency. Clara walked slowly toward the coach, toward the man who hadn't moved. As she got closer, she could see him more clearly. Perhaps 45, with dark hair graying at the temples, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of cold steel. Handsome in the way that expensive things are handsome, polished, precise, showing no wear. He looked nothing like Clara had imagined. She'd pictured someone older, rougher, marked by grief or at least by life in a mining town. This man looked like he could have stepped out of a Philadelphia parlor. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was deep, formal, utterly without warmth. "I trust your journey was acceptable. Not comfortable, not pleasant, acceptable." "It was adequate, Mr. Grayson." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, that she hadn't gushed or simpered or thanked him for his generosity. It vanished quickly. "Good. I've arranged for us to proceed directly to the house. We have much to discuss, and I prefer not to conduct business in public." He gestured toward the coach door, which Dalton had already opened. Business. He'd called it business. Clara climbed into the coach, her legs shaking slightly from days of sitting and the sudden reality of where she was, what was happening. The interior smelled of leather and tobacco. Grayson settled across from her, Dalton beside him. The porter secured her trunks on the back, and then they were moving, rolling through a town that looked like every other rough western settlement she'd seen from the train, except this one would be her prison. "I'll be direct, Miss Whitmore," Grayson said as the coach swayed over rutted roads. "I'm sure you have questions, but allow me to establish the basic facts first. You'll reside in the house immediately. The wedding will take place in 2 weeks, sufficient time for you to acclimate and for the seamstress to prepare appropriate attire. You'll have your own room until the ceremony. After that, you'll move to the primary bedroom." Clara's stomach turned. "Mr. Grayson, I have 2 children," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Thomas is 11, Caroline is 8. They require supervision and education. Your sister was adequate in that regard, though she lacked discipline. I trust you'll do better." The way he said "your sister," like Elizabeth had been a failed business venture rather than a person who'd lived and died in this man's house. "How did she die?" Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. Grayson's expression didn't change. "Fever. It was very sudden. The doctor did what he could." "Did she suffer?" "I wasn't present for the final hours. I was overseeing operations at the mine." He said this as if it were perfectly reasonable, as if being absent while his wife died was simply a matter of priorities. "Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper, can provide details if you require them." "If you require them." As if grief were a checkbox Clara might or might not select. "I'd like to see where she's buried," Clara said quietly. For the first time, Grayson looked directly at her, really looked, as if assessing whether she might become a problem. "Of course. I'll have Dalton arrange it, after you've settled in." After she'd been secured in the house, he meant. After she'd been properly installed in her new role. The coach turned onto a private drive, and Clara caught her first glimpse of the house through the window. It was larger than she'd expected, 3 stories of white-painted wood with black shutters, surrounded by manicured gardens that seemed absurdly out of place in this rough country. It looked like someone had plucked a Philadelphia mansion and dropped it in the middle of the frontier, a monument to wealth and control. "Your sister oversaw the gardens," Grayson said, following her gaze. "You'll be expected to continue that work. I believe in maintaining standards, regardless of location." The coach stopped in front of broad stone steps. Dalton exited first, then helped Clara down. Her legs felt unsteady, whether from travel or terror she couldn't say. The front door opened, and a woman emerged, perhaps 50, with graying blonde hair and the kind of face that had weathered too much to ever look young again. But her eyes were kind, and when she looked at Clara, something like sympathy flickered there. "Mrs. Brennan," Grayson said, "this is Miss Whitmore. See that she's settled in the yellow room. Dinner is at 7. I'll expect her presentable." He swept past them into the house without another word, Dalton scurrying after him like an anxious dog. Mrs. Brennan descended the steps, her expression carefully neutral, until Grayson was out of earshot. Then she leaned close to Clara and whispered, "Welcome to hell, miss. Best keep your wits about you." Before Clara could respond, the housekeeper's professional mask returned. "This way, please. I'll show you to your room." The yellow room was on the second floor, at the end of a long hallway papered in dark crimson. It was beautiful in an impersonal way. A 4-poster bed with a lace canopy, a writing desk by the window, a wardrobe that could have held 3 times the clothing Clara owned. Everything was clean, arranged, perfect. It felt like a very expensive coffin. Mrs. Brennan supervised 2 young maids who brought up Clara's trunks and unpacked them with startling efficiency. Within minutes, her few dresses hung in the wardrobe, her mother's silver brush sat on the vanity, and the small stack of books she'd brought were arranged on the desk. It was remarkable how quickly a life could be transferred, catalogued, put in its place. "I'll have water brought up for washing," Mrs. Brennan said once the maids had left. "Dinner is formal. Mr. Grayson expects punctuality." "Mrs. Brennan," Clara said quickly, before the woman could leave, "how did my sister really die?" The housekeeper's hand stilled on the door handle. For a long moment, she didn't turn around. When she finally did, her expression was carefully blank. "Fever, miss, like Mr. Grayson said." "And you believe that?" "I believe," Mrs. Brennan said slowly, "that asking too many questions in this house is dangerous. I believe you should focus on surviving the next 2 weeks, and I believe," she glanced toward the hallway, then back to Clara, "that your sister's room is the blue one, 3 doors down. It's been locked since she passed, but Mr. Grayson keeps the keys in his study desk, 3rd drawer on the left. He's always at the mine on Wednesdays until late." Clara's heart hammered. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Mrs. Elizabeth was kind to me, and because I think you deserve to know what kind of house you're walking into." Mrs. Brennan's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Be careful, Miss Clara. Your sister was careful too. It wasn't enough." Then she was gone, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a cell locking. Clara stood frozen in the middle of the yellow room, surrounded by someone else's idea of what her life should be, and felt the full weight of her situation settle over her like a shroud. She'd been sent west to replace her sister. But what if Elizabeth hadn't simply died of fever? What if... A soft knock interrupted the thought. "Yes?" Clara called out. The door opened slowly, and 2 children peered in. The boy was tall for 11, with his father's dark hair and a watchful expression that made him seem older. The girl was smaller, blonde like her mother must have been, with enormous blue eyes that held both curiosity and something like hope. "You're Aunt Clara," the girl said. It wasn't a question. "I am. You must be Caroline." The girl nodded solemnly. "This was Mama's room before she married Papa. Then she moved to the big room with him." "Are you going to live in the big room too?" "Caroline," the boy, Thomas, said sharply, "don't ask things like that." "Why not? Papa said Aunt Clara is going to be our new mama." Clara's throat tightened. "Not exactly, Caroline. I'm going to marry your father, but I can't replace your mother. No one can do that." "Our real mama died when I was a baby," Caroline said matter-of-factly. "Then Papa married your sister. She was Mama Elizabeth. Now she's dead too. Papa says you look like her." Thomas moved into the room, pulling his sister back slightly. "I apologize for my sister, Miss Whitmore. She doesn't understand propriety yet." God, he sounded like a 40-year-old man, all stiff formality and careful words. What had this house done to these children? "There's nothing to apologize for," Clara said gently. "And please, both of you can call me Clara. Would you like to sit down? I'd like to hear about your mother, about Elizabeth. I haven't seen her in 5 years." Caroline's face brightened, but Thomas hesitated, glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to appear and reprimand them. "Papa doesn't like us talking about Mama Elizabeth," he said quietly. "Why not?" "He says it's morbid." that we should look forward, not back. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. What do you think? Thomas looked surprised that anyone had asked his opinion. He considered the question carefully, and Clara could see him weighing whether to trust her. Finally, he said, I think Papa doesn't like thinking about things he can't control. And death can't be controlled. Too wise for 11. Far too wise. Your mother, Elizabeth, she was kind, wasn't she? Clara asked. Even when things were difficult? Caroline nodded enthusiastically. She read to us every night, even when she was tired, and she made Papa laugh sometimes, which hardly ever happens. Did she seem happy? The children exchanged a glance, some kind of silent communication passing between them. At first, Thomas said carefully, when she first arrived, she tried very hard. She reorganized the house, started the gardens, made sure Caroline had lessons. But then what? Then she got quiet, Caroline finished. She stopped smiling as much, and she started locking her bedroom door at night. A chill ran down Clara's spine. Do you know why? Thomas shook his head. Papa didn't like it. I heard them arguing about it once. He said it was disrespectful, that a wife shouldn't lock out her husband. She said, he paused, clearly uncomfortable. What did she say, Thomas? She said she'd rather be disrespectful than dead. The words hung in the air like smoke. Clara's hands gripped the bedspread, her mind racing. When was this? She managed to ask. 2 weeks before she got sick. Before Clara could press further, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. Thomas grabbed Caroline's hand and pulled her toward the door. We should go, he whispered urgently. Papa doesn't like us bothering guests. You're not bothering me. But they were already gone, slipping out just as Grayson's voice echoed from somewhere downstairs, calling for Dalton. Clara sat alone in the yellow room, Elizabeth's room, before she'd been moved to the master bedroom, and wondered how many other women had sat here, trapped between a life they didn't want and a future they couldn't escape. The sun was setting outside her window, painting the gardens in shades of red that looked too much like blood. Dinner was an exercise in civilized horror. The dining room was formal enough for Philadelphia society. Long mahogany table, crystal chandelier, china so fine Clara was afraid to touch it. Grayson sat at the head, Clara to his right, the children across from her. Mrs. Brennan supervised 2 serving girls who brought course after course. Soup, fish, roasted meat, vegetables Clara didn't recognize. No one spoke unless Grayson initiated it. I've arranged for the seamstress to call tomorrow, he said, cutting his meat with surgical precision. You'll be measured for your wedding dress and appropriate attire for your role as my wife. What role is that exactly? Clara asked. His knife paused for the briefest moment. Hostess, manager of household affairs, mother to the children. Is there some confusion about what a wife's duties entail, Miss Whitmore? No confusion. I simply like to understand expectations. Then understand this. I am a man of specific standards. This household runs efficiently because I ensure it does. Your sister understood that eventually. I trust you'll be quicker to adapt. Eventually, as if Elizabeth had been broken in like a horse. Tell me about the mine, Clara said, changing tactics. I understand it's quite successful. Grayson looked at her sharply, perhaps surprised by the question. The Grayson mine is the most productive silver operation in the Black Hills. We employ over 200 men and process approximately 3,000 tons of ore per month. I oversee every aspect personally. It must be dangerous work. Mining is always dangerous, but I maintain the highest safety standards. Accidents are rare. And yet they happen. What are you implying, Miss Whitmore? Clara met his cold gaze steadily. Nothing. I'm simply expressing sympathy for the families of workers who've been hurt or killed. It must be difficult for them. Something flickered across Grayson's face, anger, perhaps, or calculation. I'm a fair employer. Every man who works for me knows the risks. They're compensated accordingly. Compensated, as if money could replace a husband, a father, a life. Clara glanced at the children. Thomas was staring at his plate, moving food around without eating. Caroline was watching her father with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Was it fear? Wariness? May I be excused? Thomas asked quietly. You've barely touched your dinner, Grayson said. I'm not hungry, sir. Hunger is irrelevant. You'll eat what's provided and be grateful for it. The boy's jaw tightened, but he picked up his fork and forced down a bite of meat. Clara wanted to reach across the table, to tell him he didn't have to, that no one should be forced to swallow food like penance. But she was beginning to understand the rules of this house. Grayson's word was law, and resistance only made things worse. The meal continued in oppressive silence until finally, mercifully, Grayson set down his napkin. The children will retire now. You'll join me in my study, Miss Whitmore. We have business to discuss. It wasn't a request. The study was exactly what Clara expected. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, shelves of books that looked like they'd never been opened. Grayson gestured to a chair across from his massive desk, then poured himself a brandy without offering her any. He settled into his chair with the air of a man completely in control of his domain. I want to be clear about something, he said without preamble. I don't expect love, Miss Whitmore. I don't believe in it. Love is a fiction created by poets and peddled to fools. What I expect is a functional partnership. You'll manage the household, raise the children properly, and present an appropriate image in public. In return, you'll have security, status, and comfort. It's a fair arrangement. And if I disagree? With which part? All of it. Grayson smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you're welcome to return east. Of course, your father has made it clear he won't receive you. And I doubt you have the means to establish yourself independently. So disagreement, while theoretically possible, is practically moot. He was right, and they both knew it. Clara had spent the entire train journey running those same calculations, arriving at the same conclusion. She was trapped by economics and propriety, by a world that gave women like her exactly two choices: marry or starve. Why me? Clara asked. You're wealthy, established. You could have any number of women willing to marry you. True, but you have specific advantages. You resemble your sister, which will ease the children's transition. You're educated enough to be presentable, but not so educated as to be difficult. And most importantly, your circumstances make you cooperative. Cooperative. The word tasted like poison. I should tell you, Grayson continued, that I've been married twice before Elizabeth. My first wife, the children's mother, died in childbirth. The second, well, she was unsuited to frontier life. She left. He said this flatly, as if discussing livestock that had wandered off. And my sister? Your sister was adequate for 2 years. Then she became difficult, moody, paranoid. She started making accusations, imagining threats where none existed. The doctor believed it was a mental affliction, hysteria, perhaps, or melancholia. The fever took her before we could pursue treatment. Clara's hands gripped the arms of her chair. What kind of accusations? Absurd ones. She claimed I was trying to harm her, that she'd found evidence of— He waved a hand dismissively. Poison, of all things. Of course, there was no evidence, just the ravings of a disturbed woman. He leaned forward slightly. I'm telling you this so you understand. This household has been through enough disruption. I won't tolerate another unstable wife. If you feel yourself becoming emotional, overwrought, you'll inform me immediately so proper measures can be taken. Do you understand? Clara understood perfectly. Elizabeth had discovered something real enough to frighten her, and Grayson had dismissed it as hysteria. And then Elizabeth had died. I understand, Clara said quietly. Excellent. Grayson stood, signaling the conversation was over. Mrs. Brennan will show you to your room. We'll speak again tomorrow after the seamstress visit. Good night, Miss Whitmore. Clara walked back through the dark hallways, her mind spinning. The house was silent except for the ticking of an enormous grandfather clock and the soft sound of her skirts against the carpet. When she reached the yellow room, she locked the door behind her. Something Elizabeth had done, according to the children. Something Grayson hadn't liked. She stood at the window, looking out at the gardens Elizabeth had tended, and made a decision. Tomorrow was Wednesday. Grayson would be at the mine, and Clara would find out what her sister had died trying to tell her. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams of Elizabeth calling to her from shadows, of locked doors and missing keys, of Thomas and Caroline watching her with their 2 old eyes. When dawn finally broke, Clara was already awake, her mind fixed on the plan she'd formed in the dark hours. Breakfast was a smaller version of dinner's torture. Grayson ate quickly, efficiently, then departed for the mine with Dalton trailing behind him. The moment the coach pulled away, the house seemed to exhale. Servants moved more freely. The children came down from their rooms less stiffly. Even Mrs. Brennan's expression softened slightly. Clara waited until mid-morning, when she knew the routine had settled. Then she made her way to Grayson's study. The door was unlocked. He was arrogant enough to believe no one would dare enter uninvited. The desk was massive, orderly, every paper in its place. Clara opened the third drawer on the left, exactly as Mrs. Brennan had indicated. And there, among spare pens and sealing wax, was a small brass key. Her hands shook as she took it. This was dangerous. If Grayson found out, if he returned early, if anyone saw her. But she thought of Elizabeth, of the fear in her sister's voice, according to Thomas, of "I'd rather be disrespectful than dead," and her resolve hardened. The blue room was at the end of the same hallway as her yellow prison. Clara had passed it a dozen times without trying the handle. Now, with the key warm in her palm, she unlocked it and stepped inside. The room had been sealed since Elizabeth's death. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled stale, trapped. But unlike Clara's impersonal yellow room, this space held traces of life. A shawl draped over a chair, books stacked on the nightstand, a half-finished letter on the writing desk. Clara moved to the desk first. The letter was dated 3 weeks before Elizabeth's death, addressed to their father. "Dear Papa, I know you won't believe me. You never believe me about anything important, but I have to tell someone, and Clara is too far away, and I don't know who else to trust. Something is wrong in this house. Harold is not the man he presented himself to be. I've found—" The letter ended there, unfinished. Whatever Elizabeth had found, she'd never managed to tell anyone. Clara searched the drawers, finding normal things, writing paper, ink, ribbons, and then, at the very back of the bottom drawer, hidden under a false bottom that Clara only discovered because the drawer seemed shallower than it should be, she found it. A small leather journal, the kind meant for private thoughts. Clara's heart hammered as she opened it. The entries were dated across Elizabeth's 2 years in Deedridge, starting optimistic and slowly darkening into something else entirely. June 1883. Harold is formal but kind. The children are wary but warming to me. I think this could work. September 1883. The house is beautiful but strange. Sometimes at night I hear footsteps when everyone should be asleep. January 1884. Mrs. Brennan warned me today, very subtle, very careful, to always eat from the serving dishes, never from anything prepared specially for me. When I asked why, she changed the subject. March 1884. I found a locked room in the basement. When I asked Harold about it, he became furious, said some areas are none of my concern, but I've seen him go down there late at night. May 1884. The first wife, Jane, didn't die in childbirth like Harold claims. Mrs. Brennan finally told me. She died 6 months after Caroline was born. Sudden illness. The second wife, Margaret, didn't leave. She was buried in an unmarked grave past the north garden. Harold paid off the undertaker and the sheriff. Clara's hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the journal. She forced herself to keep reading. July 1884. I know now what's in the locked room. Poison, arsenic, strychnine, things I don't even recognize. Harold has been experimenting. I found notes, records of doses and effects. He's meticulous about it. Each wife lasted approximately 2 years before showing symptoms. I'm approaching my second anniversary. August 1884. I'm careful now. I eat only what the servants eat, drink only from bottles I open myself. Harold has noticed. He asked why I'm being difficult about meals. I lied and said my stomach has been upset. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. I think he knows that I know. September 1884. I have to get out, but if I run, he'll find me. He has connections everywhere, money to buy anyone's cooperation, and I can't leave the children. Thomas especially understands something is wrong. If I vanish, who will protect them? October 1884. I'm writing down everything I've found, all the evidence. I've hidden copies in places he won't think to look. If something happens to me, if I disappear like Margaret or sicken like Jane, maybe someone will—" The journal ended there, mid-sentence. Clara sat on Elizabeth's dusty bed, holding proof that her sister had been murdered. Proof that she'd been sent west to be the next victim in a pattern that had claimed at least 3 women already. Proof that she had perhaps 2 weeks to live unless she found a way out. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Clara's head snapped up, her pulse spiking. But it was only Mrs. Brennan, standing in the doorway with an expression of grim understanding. "You found it, then," the housekeeper said quietly. "You knew. You knew what he was doing." "I suspected, but suspicion isn't proof, and speaking against a man like Harold Grayson without proof is suicide." Mrs. Brennan stepped into the room, closing the door carefully. "What are you going to do, miss?" "I don't know. Clara's voice cracked. "I need help. I can't do this alone." "There's no law in Deedridge that isn't bought and paid for by the Grayson mine. The sheriff, the doctor, the undertaker, all of them owe their positions to Harold." "Then I'll leave. Tonight. I'll take the journal and go where? He'll have men watching the station, the roads. He's not a fool, Miss Clara. He'll have anticipated that you might discover what your sister found. That's why he wanted you here. Someone who looks like her. Someone to replace her so the children don't ask too many questions. Someone with nowhere else to go." The trap was perfect, suffocating. "There has to be something," Clara whispered. Mrs. Brennan considered her for a long moment. "There might be one person. A man who's helped women before, women running from bad situations, but he's not respectable, not someone a lady should associate with. I don't care about respectability. I care about surviving. His name is Ethan Cole. He's a cowboy, works various ranches, but sometimes, not often, mind you, he helps people who need to disappear. There's a stagecoach runs to Rapid City every Friday. Cole usually rides escort for it. If you could get a message to him, tell him what's happening." "Would he believe me? Would he help?" Mrs. Brennan's expression was unreadable. "Elizabeth thought he would. I found a letter she'd written to him, never sent. She'd heard about him the same way I did, whispers, stories of women who'd escaped bad marriages or worse. But she waited too long, got sick before she could reach him. Got poisoned, Clara thought. Got killed for knowing too much. How do I contact him?" "The stagecoach stops at Miller's Station Friday morning, 7 o'clock. It's about 20 miles west. If you can get there, if you can talk to Cole." Mrs. Brennan shook her head. "But getting there means leaving the house without permission, and Harold won't allow that." Clara stood, clutching Elizabeth's journal to her chest. "Then I won't ask permission. Miss Clara, I can't stay here. I won't be the 4th wife to die in this house. There has to be a way." Mrs. Brennan studied her, and Clara saw something shift in the older woman's expression, a decision being made. "There might be, but it's dangerous, and if it goes wrong, we'll both suffer for it. Tell me." The housekeeper moved to the window, looking out at the gardens. "Tomorrow, Harold is hosting a dinner for investors from Denver. He'll be occupied all evening, focused on business. The kitchen will be chaos, the house full of strangers. That's when you run. I'll have a horse ready in the north stable, the old mare that Harold never uses. She's slow but steady. You ride to Miller's Station, get on that stagecoach, and pray that Ethan Cole is the man the stories say he is. What about you? When Grayson realizes I'm gone, I'll say you were overwrought, that you must have panicked. He'll believe it. Women are always panicking in his version of the world." Mrs. Brennan's smile was bitter. "I've survived this house for 15 years by knowing how to lie. I'll survive this too." Clara wanted to argue to find a safer plan, but she knew there wasn't one. This was the only chance she'd get. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me, for trying to help Elizabeth." "I didn't help her enough." Mrs. Brennan's voice was heavy with regret. "Don't make me fail twice. Stay alive, Miss Clara. Get far away from here and don't look back." The housekeeper left, and Clara stood alone in her dead sister's room, holding the journal that was both evidence and death sentence. Tomorrow night she'd run. She'd make it to Miller's Station. She'd find Ethan Cole. She'd survive. She had to. because the alternative was a slow death by poison, a locked room in the basement, and another woman buried in an unmarked grave where the gardens grew so beautifully green. The dinner party descended on the house like an invading army. Clara watched from her window as carriages arrived throughout Thursday afternoon, disgorging men in expensive suits and their elaborately dressed wives. Grayson had spared no expense. The dining room gleamed with silver and crystal. Servants rushed through hallways carrying trays and linens, and the smell of roasting meat filled every corner of the house. Clara had been instructed to dress appropriately and smile pleasantly. She was to be displayed like another piece of Grayson's carefully curated wealth. The seamstress had delivered her new wardrobe that morning, dresses in dark colors that Grayson had selected himself, each one high-necked and restrictive. Clara wore the deep green silk now, her hair arranged by a maid into an elaborate style that pulled painfully at her scalp. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger wearing her face. "You look beautiful, Aunt Clara," Caroline said from the doorway. The girl had been hovering nearby all day, sensing something in the air but not understanding what. "Thank you, sweetheart." Clara managed a smile. "Shouldn't you be having dinner with Thomas in the nursery?" "Mrs. Brennan said we have to stay upstairs during Papa's party, but I wanted to see you first." Caroline came closer, her small face troubled. "Are you afraid?" The question caught Clara off guard. "Why would I be afraid?" "You look like Mama Elizabeth did, before she got sick, like you're pretending everything is fine, but really you want to run away." Clara knelt down, taking the girl's hands in hers. God, she was so young to understand so much about pretending. "Caroline, do you remember when your mama was sick? Did she say anything to you?" The girl's eyes filled with tears. "She said she was sorry, that she tried to protect us, but she wasn't strong enough. She made Thomas promise to take care of me." "Protect you from what?" Caroline glanced toward the door, then whispered, "From Papa. But that doesn't make sense. Papa takes care of us." Clara pulled the girl into a hug, her heart breaking. These children had been living in a house of poisoned kindness, never knowing which version of safety was real. "Listen to me," Clara said quietly. "Your mama loved you very much, and she was strong, stronger than anyone knew. You remember that, all right? Are you going to get sick too?" "No, darling, I'm not." Because tonight she'd be gone, one way or another. The sound of Grayson's voice echoed up from downstairs, greeting his guests. Caroline pulled away quickly, wiping her eyes. "I have to go. Papa doesn't like it when we're late for dinner." She paused at the door. "I hope you don't get sick, Aunt Clara. I like you better than I thought I would." Then she was gone, leaving Clara alone with her racing heart and the weight of what was about to happen. The dinner was endless. Clara sat beside Grayson at the long table, surrounded by men who discussed ore yields and stock prices, while their wives made polite conversation about gardening and servants. She smiled when expected, nodded at appropriate moments, and counted the minutes until she could escape. Grayson was in his element, charming when necessary, authoritative always, making it clear that he was the most important man in the room. He barely glanced at Clara, except to occasionally rest his hand on her shoulder in a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like ownership. "And this is your fiancé?" one of the Denver investors asked, a portly man with mutton chops and calculating eyes. "Indeed. Miss Clara Whitmore, recently arrived from Philadelphia. Her sister was my late wife." "Ah, keeping it in the family, so to speak. Very practical, Grayson." "I believe in practical arrangements," Grayson said smoothly. "Marriage is a business contract like any other. Sentiment is irrelevant." The investor laughed as if Grayson had made a joke. Clara's stomach turned. As dessert was being served, an elaborate confection of cream and berries, Mrs. Brennan appeared at Clara's elbow with a small glass of cordial. "For you, miss? Mr. Grayson ordered it specially." Clara looked at the amber liquid, then at Grayson, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Was this a test? Or had he already decided to speed up his usual timeline? "How thoughtful," Clara said, not touching the glass. "But I'm afraid I have the most terrible headache. The excitement of the evening, I suppose. Would you mind terribly if I retired early?" Grayson's jaw tightened slightly. "The evening has barely begun." "I know, and I apologize, but I wouldn't want to be poor company for your guests." She turned to the investor's wife beside her. "I'm sure you understand. These Western evenings can be overwhelming for those of us unused to frontier hospitality. The woman tittered sympathetically. Of course, dear. You must rest. Grayson couldn't argue without appearing ungracious in front of his investors. Clara saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options. Very well, he said finally. But drink your cordial first. It will help with the headache. The trap was so obvious it was almost insulting. Clara picked up the glass, brought it to her lips, then pretended to stumble slightly as she stood. The cordial spilled across the white tablecloth, staining it gold. Oh, how clumsy of me. I'm so sorry. In the confusion of servants rushing to clean the spill, Clara slipped away from the table. She could feel Grayson's eyes boring into her back as she left the dining room, but she didn't look back. Mrs. Brennan caught up with her at the base of the stairs. The horse is ready, the housekeeper whispered. North stable, third stall. There's a saddlebag with food and water. I included your sister's journal. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me yet. Just ride fast and don't stop until you reach Miller's station. Mrs. Brennan pressed something into Clara's hand, a small Derringer pistol. Your sister hid this in her room. I don't know if you know how to use it, but I do. Their father had insisted both daughters learn, though he'd thought it unladylike. Mrs. Brennan, what about the children? If Grayson discovers what I know, I'll watch them. And if things get dangerous, I'll get them out. I promise you that, Miss Clara. Clara wanted to argue, to demand a better plan, but raised voices from the dining room told her time was running out. She squeezed the housekeeper's hand once, then hurried upstairs. In the yellow room, she changed quickly into the most practical dress she owned, a simple brown wool that wouldn't show dirt. She pulled her hair into a tight bun, grabbed the small satchel she'd prepared that morning with her mother's silver brush and what little money she had, and moved to the window. The north stable was visible from here, a dark shape against the darker night. Claire could see a faint light moving inside. Mrs. Brennan, preparing the horse. Footsteps sounded in the hallway outside her room. Clara froze, her hand on the window latch. The footsteps paused at her door. A soft knock. Miss Whitmore? It's Thomas. Relief flooded through her. Clara opened the door to find the boy standing there in his nightshirt, his face pale and frightened. You're leaving, he said. It wasn't a question. Thomas, Good. You should. He thrust something at her. A folded piece of paper. Mama Elizabeth gave this to me before she died. She said if anyone ever came asking about her, someone who might believe the truth, I should give them this. Clara unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It was a map, crude but detailed, showing the house, the gardens, and a spot marked with an X near the north fence. What is this? Where Mama buried her evidence. She said the journal was important but not enough. She said she needed something that couldn't be dismissed as the ravings of a hysterical woman. Thomas's voice cracked slightly on the last words, as if he were quoting someone. She was going to dig it up and take it to the federal marshal in Rapid City, but she got sick before she could. Clara looked at the map, then at the boy who was trying so hard to be brave. Thomas, do you understand what your father is? He's a murderer. The boy said it flatly, without emotion. I've known for a long time, I just didn't know how to prove it. And I didn't know how to protect Caroline if I tried. You're 11 years old, this isn't your responsibility. Then whose is it? His eyes blazed with sudden anger. I'm the oldest. I'm supposed to take care of my sister. That's what Mama Elizabeth said. And I've been watching Papa, learning his patterns, trying to keep Caroline safe. But I'm not stupid, Aunt Clara. I know I can't do this forever. That's why you have to get away. You have to tell someone what he is. The weight of it crushed down on Clara, this child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd spent years protecting his sister from a monster they had to call father. Come with me, Clara said suddenly. Both of you, right now. Thomas shook his head. Papa would chase us. We'd slow you down, and he'd catch all of us. But if you go alone, if you're fast enough, maybe you can bring help back. The federal marshal, or someone who has more power than Papa's money can buy. I can't just leave you here with him. Mrs. Brennan will watch us, and Papa won't do anything while his investors are here. He's too careful about his reputation. Thomas grabbed her hand. Please, Aunt Clara, this is the only way. Get the evidence Mama buried. Get to safety. Send help. Voices rose from downstairs, Grayson's among them, sharp with irritation. The dinner party was breaking up earlier than planned. "Go," Thomas whispered urgently. "I'll tell Papa you were ill and went to bed. That will buy you a few hours at least." Clara pulled the boy into a fierce hug. "I will come back for you, I swear it." "I know." He pulled away, already putting on the mask of polite indifference he wore around his father. "Now go before he comes looking." Clara climbed out the window onto the narrow ledge that ran along the second floor. Her fingers scraped against painted wood as she inched toward the trellis she'd spotted earlier, Elizabeth's trellis, built for roses that now grew wild. It creaked under her weight, but held. She dropped the last few feet to the ground, her boots sinking into soft earth. The garden stretched out before her, shadows within shadows. Somewhere among Elizabeth's carefully tended flowers was buried the evidence that could destroy Harold Grayson. Clara pulled out the map, orienting herself. North fence, near the white rose bushes. She ran, keeping low, grateful for the darkness and the distraction of departing carriages at the front of the house. The white roses glowed faintly in the moonlight. Clara dropped to her knees and began digging with her bare hands, the soft earth giving way easily, too easily. Someone had been here recently. Her fingers hit something hard, a metal box small enough to fit in both hands. Clara pulled it free and pried open the lid. Inside were papers, records written in Grayson's precise handwriting, detailing purchases of arsenic and strychnine, noting doses and effects, clinically recording the decline of 3 different women. Jane, his first wife, Margaret, the second, and the beginnings of notes on Elizabeth. There were also letters, correspondence with a doctor in Denver who specialized in poisons, discussing symptoms and timelines, and a ledger showing payments to the local doctor, the sheriff, the undertaker. Blood money to ensure silence. It was everything Elizabeth had promised, undeniable proof. Clara shoved the box into her satchel just as light blazed from the house's second floor. Her window. Grayson must have checked on her. She heard him shout her name, the sound carrying across the garden like a gunshot. Clara ran. The north stable loomed ahead. She burst through the door to find a saddled mare waiting exactly as Mrs. Brennan had promised. Clara threw herself onto the horse, her hands clumsy with panic as she grabbed the reins. Behind her, more lights were flooding the house. Men's voices. Grayson's above them all, barking orders. Clara kicked the mare into motion. The horse bolted from the stable just as the first searching lanterns appeared in the garden. She urged the animal faster, heading for the road that led west toward Miller's station. Hoofbeats thundered behind her, Grayson's men, already mounted and pursuing. The mare was old and slow, just as Mrs. Brennan had warned. Clara could hear the pursuit gaining ground, could see the bobbing lanterns getting closer. She leaned low over the horse's neck, whispering desperate encouragement. The road curved through a stretch of trees, and Clara took a chance. She yanked the reins hard, steering the mare off the road and into the underbrush. Branches whipped at her face, but the darkness under the trees was absolute. She heard the pursuing riders thunder past on the road, their lanterns creating moving pools of light that didn't penetrate the forest. Clara sat frozen, one hand pressed over the mare's nose to keep her quiet, listening to the men search the road ahead. Eventually, their voices faded as they rode on toward Miller's station. But they'd be back, and Grayson would have men watching every road, every station, every possible escape route. Clara pulled out Thomas's map with shaking hands, trying to see it in the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. If she couldn't take the road, she'd have to go cross-country. The terrain would be rough, dangerous at night, but it was the only option. She'd made it perhaps 3 miles when she heard the stagecoach. The sound carried through the quiet night, wheels and hoofbeats, the jingle of harness. Clara emerged from the trees onto a ridge and looked down to see the coach traveling the road below, heading west. It had to be the Rapid City run, and riding alongside it, a lone figure on horseback, rifle resting across his saddle. The escort, Ethan Cole, if Mrs. Brennan's information was right. Clara urged the tired mare down the slope, sliding on loose rocks and pine needles. The stagecoach was moving fast, too fast for her to catch on the mare. She'd have to intercept it, make them stop. The derringer Mrs. Brennan had given her was still in her pocket. Clara pulled it out, aimed at the sky, and fired. The shot cracked through the night like thunder. The stagecoach jerked to a halt, the driver shouting in alarm. The escort wheeled his horse around, bringing his rifle up to aim directly at Clara. "Don't shoot!" Clara screamed, raising her hands. "Please, I need help." "Step into the light," the escort called. His voice was calm, controlled, but the rifle didn't waver. Clara rode closer, letting the moonlight fall on her face. She could see him more clearly now, tall, broad-shouldered, perhaps 30, with dark hair and a face that had seen too much to be easily surprised. "My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm running from Harold Grayson. Are you Ethan Cole?" The rifle lowered slightly. "Depends on who's asking and why." "I'm asking because my sister wrote you a letter she never sent. Because she thought you might help her escape a man who was poisoning her. Because I found proof that Harold Grayson has murdered 3 wives and I'm supposed to be the 4th. The driver of the stagecoach leaned down. "Cole, we don't have time for this. Grayson's men are probably... I know what they're probably doing." Cole studied Clara for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're the new one, the replacement wife. Whole town's been talking about you." "Then the whole town knows I'm supposed to marry him in less than 2 weeks. And you're running away the night before the wedding dress fitting. That's either very brave or very stupid." "It's survival," Clara's voice cracked. "He's going to kill me, just like he killed Elizabeth and Margaret and Jane. I have proof, records, letters, everything, but he has men searching for me right now, and if they catch me..." Hoofbeats thundered in the distance. The pursuers had circled back. Cole made a decision. "Get in the coach, now." "What?" "You heard me? Hand me your horse and get in the damn coach." Clara didn't argue. She slid off the mare, grabbed her satchel, and scrambled into the stagecoach. There were 2 other passengers inside, an elderly woman and a businessman who both looked terrified. "What's happening?" the woman quavered. "Nothing that concerns you, ma'am," Cole said, tying Clara's mare to the back of the coach. "Driver, when I give the signal, you run these horses like the devil's chasing you, because he might be." He rode ahead slightly, positioning himself between the coach and the approaching riders. Clara could see them now, 5 men on fast horses, lanterns swinging wildly. They spotted the stagecoach and whooped in triumph. "Stop that coach," one of them yelled. "We've got a fugitive." Cole raised his rifle. "This is a federal mail run. You've got no authority to stop it." The lead rider, a man Clara recognized as one of Grayson's mine foremen, sneered. "We've got authority from Harold Grayson, and that's all the authority we need in this territory." "Then you don't know much about how law works outside of Deed Ridge." Cole's voice was steel-wrapped in velvet. "This coach runs under federal contract. Anyone who interferes with it is committing a federal crime. Now, I suggest you boys turn around and tell Mr. Grayson that his business is his own, but mine is getting this mail and these passengers to Rapid City. There's a woman on that coach who's engaged to Mr. Grayson. He wants her back. I see passengers under my protection. That's all I see." The foreman's hand dropped to his gun. "We can do this easy or hard, Cole." In one fluid motion, Cole cocked his rifle and aimed it directly at the foreman's chest. "Hard it is, then, but you'll want to think carefully about your next move. I'm a fair shot, and I've got 5 bullets. There's 5 of you. Even odds, except I'm the one getting paid to be here, and you're the ones breaking federal law." The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Clara held her breath, her hand clutching the derringer in her pocket. Then one of the other riders, younger, less certain, said, "Maybe we should go back. Tell Mr. Grayson we lost her trail. He can send word ahead to Rapid City, have the marshal there pick her up." The foreman's jaw worked, fury and calculation warring on his face. Finally, he spat into the dirt. "This ain't over, Cole. Grayson's going to hear about your interference." "I'm sure he will. Now get off the road before I decide you're obstructing federal business and start shooting on principle." The riders wheeled their horses around and thundered back toward Deed Ridge. Cole watched them go, rifle still ready, until they disappeared into the darkness. Then he rode back to the coach and called up to the driver. "Let's move. And don't stop until we're 20 miles past the county line." The coach lurched into motion. Clara sagged against the seat, her whole body shaking with reaction. The elderly woman reached over and patted her hand. "There, dear. You're safe now." But Clara knew better. She wasn't safe. She wouldn't be safe until Harold Grayson was behind bars or in the ground. And even then, she wasn't sure the nightmares would stop. The stagecoach rolled through the night, carrying Clara away from Deedridge and toward a future that was uncertain but at least her own. Behind them, in a house where poison masqueraded as care and murder wore the face of respectability, two children waited for rescue and a killer planned his next move. The race had only just begun. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Black Hills, painting the landscape in shades of ash and iron. Clara hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with every jolt of the stagecoach reminding her how close she'd come to capture, not with the weight of Elizabeth's evidence pressing against her ribs through the satchel she clutched like a lifeline. The elderly woman had dozed off hours ago, her head bobbing gently with the motion of the coach. The businessman had retreated behind a newspaper he couldn't possibly read in the dim light. Both of them were carefully not looking at Clara, as if acknowledging her presence might draw them into whatever trouble she carried. When the coach finally stopped at a way station just after sunrise, Clara's legs were so stiff she could barely climb down. Ethan Cole was already dismounting, his movements fluid despite having ridden all night. He spoke briefly with the station keeper, then gestured for Clara to follow him around the side of the building. She went, though every instinct screamed caution. Out here, away from the other passengers, she was vulnerable. For all she knew, Cole had already sent word ahead to Grayson, was planning to collect a reward for her return. But he just leaned against the rough wooden wall and studied her with eyes that were harder to read than the code in Elizabeth's journal. "You look like hell," he said finally. "I feel worse." Clara's voice came out hoarse. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was until she tried to speak. Cole pulled a canteen from his belt and handed it to her. "Drink, then tell me what you're really running from." Clara drank deeply, the water tasting of metal and mercy. Then she met his gaze directly. "I told you already. Harold Grayson murdered my sister, and 2 wives before her." "That's a serious accusation, the kind that gets women called hysterical and locked up for their own good." "I have proof." Clara pulled the metal box from her satchel, opened it. Records of poison purchases, letters discussing symptoms and dosages, a ledger showing payoffs to keep people quiet. "My sister buried this before she died." She knew what was happening to her, and she documented everything. Cole took the box, examining the contents with the same careful attention he'd shown while watching Grayson's men. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A hardening, a recognition. "And you think taking this to the marshal in Rapid City will be enough?" "It has to be. It's everything." "Everything except jurisdiction." Cole handed the box back. "Grayson owns half the territorial government, Miss Whitmore. The marshal in Rapid City owes his appointment to men who owe their fortunes to Grayson's mine. You walk in there with this evidence, and you'll be escorted right back to Deedridge in chains." Clara's stomach dropped. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just let him get away with it?" "I didn't say that." Cole straightened, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "But you need to understand what you're up against. Grayson isn't just rich. He's connected. He has politicians in his pocket, lawmen on his payroll, and a reputation for dealing harshly with anyone who threatens him. I know what he is. I've seen what he does to women who can't escape." "Then you should also know that running isn't enough. You need someone who can't be bought or intimidated, someone with authority that supersedes territorial politics." "Who?" Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the gray and revealing a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "There's a federal judge in Denver," he said finally. "Silas Montgomery. Old bastard, mean as a snake, but honest to a fault. He's been trying to clean up corruption in the mining territories for years. If anyone would listen to your evidence and act on it, it's him." "Denver is 300 miles from here, closer to 400, and Grayson will have every road watched, every station monitored. He'll be sending telegrams right now, calling in favors, putting a price on your return." Cole's expression was grim. "You're not just running from one man anymore, Miss Whitmore. You're running from an entire system built to protect men like him." Clara looked down at the box in her hands, at the careful documentation of her sister's murder. Elizabeth had been brave enough to gather this evidence, smart enough to hide it, but she hadn't lived long enough to use it. Was Clara just going to die too? Was this all futile? "Then help me," she said quietly. "Please. You helped other women. Mrs. Brennan told me. Women running from bad situations. Help me get to Denver. Help me make sure my sister's death meant something. Cole studied her for a long moment. You know I'm not doing this out of kindness, right? Grayson and I have history, bad history. This is about settling scores as much as it is about justice. I don't care about your motives. I care about stopping him before he does to someone else what he did to Elizabeth. And what about those kids? The ones you told me about in the coach? Claire's throat tightened. Thomas made me promise to bring help back. He said he'd keep himself and Caroline safe until then. But every day I'm gone is another day they're trapped with a murderer who calls himself their father. Smart boy, making you promise that. Keeps you focused on staying alive instead of doing something stupid and noble. Cole pushed off from the wall. All right, Miss Whitmore. I'll get you to Denver. But we do this my way, and you follow my lead without question. Understood? What's your way? First, we don't take the stage. Too easy to track, too many witnesses. Second, you're going to need to change everything about how you look. That fancy dress and city hairdo make you stand out like a sore thumb. Third, you're going to learn how to shoot that derringer properly, because where we're going, looking helpless will get you killed. Clara nodded, relief and fear warring in her chest. When do we start? Soon as you're ready. Cole glanced back toward the way station. But first you need to write a letter, something that can be held in trust and delivered if things go wrong. Insurance, in case Grayson catches up with us. Who would I send it to? Montgomery, the judge. I know people who can get it to him through channels Grayson can't intercept. If we don't make it to Denver alive, at least the evidence will. The thought of not making it alive sent ice through Claire's veins, but she forced herself to nod. Cole was right. They needed backup plans, insurance, ways to make sure Elizabeth's death wasn't for nothing, even if Clara's ended up being for something. She borrowed paper and pen from the station keeper and wrote carefully, explaining everything. Who she was, what she'd discovered, why she was running. She included specific details from the evidence box, enough that Montgomery would know the letter was genuine. At the end, she added something that hurt to write, but needed to be said. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. But Harold Grayson's children, Thomas and Caroline, are still alive and still in danger. Please, someone save them. They deserve better than to grow up in a house built on murder. She sealed the letter and handed it to Cole, who tucked it inside his jacket. There's a freight wagon heading south in an hour, he said. Driver owes me a favor. He'll take this to a contact in Cheyenne who'll make sure it reaches Montgomery. Now come on, we've got work to do. The work turned out to involve Clara becoming someone else entirely. Cole took her to a general store in the next town they reached, a dusty settlement called Cripple Creek that looked like it might blow away in the next strong wind. He bought her men's clothing, rough canvas trousers, a work shirt, a battered hat that had seen better days. In a back room, Clara changed out of her green silk dress and into clothes that smelled of horses and hard living. When she emerged, Cole looked her over critically. Hair's still too long, too recognizable. You want me to cut it? I want you to look like someone Grayson's men would ride right past without a second glance. He handed her a pair of scissors. Your choice how short, but remember, every inch you keep is another chance someone recognizes you. Clara took the scissors with shaking hands and moved to a cracked mirror hanging on the wall. Her hair had always been her one vanity, dark and thick and falling to her waist when unbound. Elizabeth used to braid it for her when they were girls, weaving ribbons through the plaits. She raised the scissors and started cutting. The hair fell in long, dark strands around her feet, each one a piece of the person she'd been. When she finished, what remained was barely chin-length, ragged and uneven. She looked like a boy, or a woman who'd been through hell and stopped caring about propriety. She looked like someone who might survive. Better, Cole said when she showed him. Now we need to work on how you carry yourself. City women walk different, smaller steps, shoulders back but not too far. Out here, you walk like you own the ground you're standing on and aren't afraid of what might be on it. For the next hour, he taught her how to move, how to stand, how to look at men without dropping her gaze, but without challenging them either. He showed her how to load and fire the derringer, made her practice until her hands stopped shaking when she pulled the trigger. You're not going to win a gunfight, he said bluntly, but you might buy yourself enough time to run. That's all survival is sometimes, buying time until you can get to safety. By the time they left Cripple Creek, riding horses Cole had somehow acquired, Without Clara seeing money change hands, the sun was high and hot. Clara's new clothes chafed. The saddle was torture on muscles unused to riding, and every time she caught her reflection in a stream or window, she startled at the stranger looking back. But she was alive. She was free. And she was heading toward Denver. They traveled through back country, avoiding main roads and populated areas. Cole seemed to know every deer trail and forgotten path, navigating by instinct and the position of the sun. When Clara asked how he knew the terrain so well, he just shrugged. Been running or chasing for most of my adult life. You learn the land or you die. Which were you, running or chasing? Both, depending on the year. He didn't elaborate and Clara didn't push. Whatever history Cole carried, it had made him into someone who could navigate impossible situations and survive what should have been fatal. She needed that skill more than she needed his life story. On the second night, they made camp in a cave that overlooked a valley Clara didn't know the name of. Cole built a small fire, positioned so the smoke would disperse before it could be seen from below, and shared jerky and hardtack that tasted like leather and salt. "Tell me about your sister," he said as they ate. "The real her, not just what she wrote in that journal." Clara was surprised by the question. She'd expected tactical discussions, plans for reaching Denver, not this quiet inquiry into Elizabeth's life. "She was 3 years older than me," Clara said slowly. "Braver, smarter, kinder. When our mother died, Elizabeth basically raised me. She taught me to read, defended me when our father was in one of his moods, made sure I had opportunities even when we had no money." "Sounds like she loved you." "She did. That's why she agreed to come west in the first place. Father needed money, Grayson needed a wife, and Elizabeth thought if she made the sacrifice, I'd be free to choose my own life." Clara's voice broke slightly. "Instead, she died, and I got sent west anyway. All her sacrifice for nothing." "Not for nothing," Cole poked at the fire, sending sparks drifting up into the darkness. "She left you evidence. She made sure you'd know the truth. That's not nothing." "It's not enough either." "No," Cole agreed. "It's not. But it's what we've got to work with." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Clara asked the question that had been nagging at her since he'd agreed to help. "Why are you doing this? Really? You said you have history with Grayson, but what kind of history makes you risk your life for a woman you just met?" Cole was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Then he said, 7 years ago, I was working as a deputy in a town called Silver Fork. Small place, mostly miners and the people who sold them things. Grayson owned the mine there too. Seems like he owns half the mines in the territory." He paused, staring into the flames. "There was a woman, Sarah. She was married to one of Grayson's foremen, and he wasn't kind to her. One day she came to me, showed me bruises, begged me to help her leave. I was young, stupid, thought I could just arrest the husband and that would be the end of it." Clara could guess where this was going, but she stayed silent, letting him tell it. "Turned out the husband was protected. Grayson's man, which meant he was untouchable. The sheriff told me to back off, that it was a domestic matter and none of my business. I didn't listen. I helped Sarah pack, gave her money for a ticket east, put her on a coach myself." "What happened?" "They found her 3 days later. Coach had been stopped. Sarah pulled off and beaten to death. Made it look like bandits, but everyone knew it was a message. Don't cross Grayson's men. Don't interfere with how things are done." Cole's jaw was tight, his hands clenched on his knees. "I tried to investigate, tried to bring charges. Got run out of town for my trouble. Barely escaped with my life. Lost my badge, my reputation, everything. Spent the next 7 years drifting, helping where I could, trying to make up for not being smart enough or strong enough to save one woman who trusted me." "It wasn't your fault," Clara said quietly. "Wasn't it? I made her think she'd be safe. I made her think the law mattered more than money and power. I got her killed with my naive belief in justice." "You tried to help. That's more than most people would do. Trying isn't enough when people end up dead anyway." Cole looked at her then, his expression raw. "That's why I'm helping you, Miss Whitmore. Not because I'm noble or good, but because I've been watching Grayson operate for 7 years, waiting for a chance to bring him down. You and your sister's evidence might finally give me that chance." Clara understood then. This wasn't just about saving her or avenging Elizabeth. This was about redemption for a young deputy who'd failed to save someone he cared about. This was about proving that sometimes justice could win. Then let's make sure we don't waste it, she said. They reached the outskirts of Denver 5 days later, filthy and exhausted and running on nerves and desperation. Cole had pushed them hard, riding from before dawn until after dark, taking risks on shorter routes that brought them too close to populated areas. Twice they'd spotted men who might have been Grayson's searchers. Once they'd had to hide in a dry creek bed while a patrol of territorial marshals passed within 20 feet of their position. But they'd made it. Denver sprawled before them, a real city with brick buildings and paved streets, and the kind of civilization Clara had started to think she'd never see again. Montgomery's courthouse is downtown, Cole said as they approached from the east, still staying off the main roads. But we can't just walk in? Grayson will have eyes here too, people watching for you. Then how do we reach him? Carefully. Cole dismounted, tying his horse to a post outside what looked like a boarding house. First we get cleaned up. You look like you've been dragged behind a horse for 100 miles. I feel like it too. Cole managed a small smile, the first real one Clara had seen from him. Come on. I know a place that doesn't ask questions and doesn't remember faces. The boarding house was run by a Chinese woman who took one look at them and quoted a price that made Clara wince. But Cole paid without arguing, and the woman led them upstairs to adjacent rooms that were small but clean. Hot water in 10 minutes, she said. You want food? You come down in 1 hour. You want privacy? You stay longer. Clara had never appreciated hot water more. She scrubbed away days of trail dust and fear, watching brown water swirl down the drain. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a robe the boarding house had provided, she found clean clothes laid out on her bed. A simple dress, nothing fancy, but respectable enough for a city. There was a note pinned to it in Cole's handwriting. Burn the trail clothes. Dress like the city woman you are. We meet Montgomery tonight. Clara dressed slowly, her hands shaking again, but from anticipation rather than fear. Tonight. Tonight they'd present the evidence to someone who might actually listen, who had the power to act. Tonight, Harold Grayson would start paying for what he'd done. She met Cole downstairs. He'd cleaned up too, looking less like a rough cowboy and more like a man who could walk into a courthouse without drawing stares. He had a package under his arm, the metal box with Elizabeth's evidence, she realized. Ready? He asked. Clara thought of Elizabeth, of Thomas and Caroline, of all the women who died because Harold Grayson thought wealth made him untouchable. Ready, she said. They hired a cab to take them to the federal courthouse, an imposing granite building that looked like justice itself carved in stone. Cole led her through a side entrance, past clerks and lawyers who barely glanced at them, up a flight of stairs to a hallway lined with closed doors. He stopped at one marked Judge Silas Montgomery, Federal Circuit Court, and knocked firmly. Come, a gravelly voice called from inside. They entered to find an office that was organized chaos, books and papers everywhere, but clearly sorted by some system only the occupant understood. Behind a massive desk sat a man who looked exactly like Cole had described, old, with white hair and a face carved by years of dealing with human cruelty and corruption. He was reading a document, a pair of spectacles perched on his nose, and didn't look up as they entered. Judge Montgomery, Cole said. I'm Ethan Cole. I sent word we were coming. Montgomery set down the document and removed his spectacles, studying them both with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. The letter about Grayson, he said. It wasn't a question. I was wondering if you'd actually show up or if this was some kind of elaborate hoax. It's not a hoax. Clara stepped forward, pulling the metal box from Cole's hands. My name is Clara Whitmore. Harold Grayson murdered my sister and at least 2 other women. I have proof. She opened the box, spreading the contents across Montgomery's desk. The poison purchase records, the letters, the ledger of payoffs, Elizabeth's journal with its careful documentation of symptoms and fear. Montgomery examined each piece with the meticulous attention of someone who'd spent decades weighing evidence and making judgments. The silence stretched so long that Clara wanted to scream, to demand he say something, anything. Finally, he looked up. This is damning, he said quietly, if it's authentic. It's authentic. My sister buried it before she died. She knew Grayson was poisoning her and she wanted someone to know the truth. And you were supposed to be the next victim? I was sent west to replace her. To marry Grayson in 2 weeks. When I found the evidence, I ran. Montgomery leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. You understand what you're asking me to do? Harold Grayson is one of the wealthiest men in the territory. He has connections at every level of government. Bringing charges against him will be complicated. I understand he's murdered 4 women and will keep murdering until someone stops him, Clara said fiercely. I understand there are 2 children living in his house right now who are in danger every day he remains free. I understand that if you don't act, I'll have run 500 miles for nothing and my sister will have died for nothing. Something shifted in Montgomery's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of someone who wouldn't back down no matter how impossible the odds. The children, he said. You're sure they're at risk? His own son told me he's been protecting his sister for years, watching his father's patterns, trying to keep her safe. An 11-year-old boy shouldn't have to do that. Montgomery nodded slowly. All right, Miss Whitmore. I'll issue a warrant for Grayson's arrest. But I warn you, serving it won't be easy. Grayson will fight this with every resource he has. You'll be called to testify. Your life will be examined, your character questioned, your sister's reputation dragged through the mud. Are you prepared for that? Clara thought of Elizabeth's last entry in the journal, cut off mid-sentence because death had interrupted her writing. She thought of Thomas making her promise to bring help back. She thought of Caroline asking if Clara was going to get sick too. I'm prepared, she said. Then we begin. Montgomery reached for his pen, but first, I need you to write out a full statement. Everything you witnessed, everything you discovered, every detail, no matter how small. Cole, I'll need your testimony too about the pursuit, about Grayson's attempts to recapture Miss Whitmore. This has to be airtight. They spent the next 4 hours in that office, Clara writing until her hand cramped, answering Montgomery's precise questions, going over every detail again and again. Cole corroborated her story about the escape, about Grayson's men trying to stop the federal mail coach, about the threats and intimidation. When they were finally finished, night had fallen outside the courthouse windows. Montgomery signed the arrest warrant with a flourish, then looked at them both seriously. This warrant will be served tomorrow morning by federal marshals. Grayson will be taken into custody and transported here for arraignment. The children will be placed in protective custody until the trial. He paused. But you need to understand, between now and then, you're both in danger. Grayson has resources. If word reaches him before the marshals do, we'll be careful, Cole said. Be more than careful. Be invisible. Montgomery stood, handing Clara a sealed envelope. This is for the boarding house where you're staying. It authorizes federal protection. Don't leave. Don't trust anyone you don't know. And don't assume you're safe just because you're in Denver. They left the courthouse through the same side entrance they'd used to enter, Cole's hand resting on his gun, both of them scanning the street for threats. The cab ride back to the boarding house felt endless, every shadow a potential ambush, every stranger a possible assassin. But they made it back safely. The Chinese woman took Montgomery's letter without comment and led them to rooms on the top floor. No one comes up here without me knowing, she said. You're safe tonight. Clara collapsed onto the narrow bed, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. She'd done it. She'd gotten the evidence to someone who could act on it. Tomorrow, marshals would ride to Deedridge. Tomorrow, Harold Grayson would finally face justice. Tomorrow, Thomas and Caroline would be free. She was almost asleep when a soft knock came at her door. Clara grabbed the derringer from under her pillow and approached cautiously. It's me, Cole's voice said quietly. She opened the door to find him standing there, looking as exhausted as she felt. Just wanted to check you were all right, he said. I am, thanks to you. Thank me when Grayson's convicted and those kids are safe. Until then, we're not done. But he smiled slightly. You did good today, Miss Whitmore. Your sister would be proud. The words hit Clara harder than she expected. She blinked back sudden tears. She'd just be glad someone finally listened. Montgomery's good people. If anyone can make this stick, it's him. Cole hesitated, then added, Get some rest. Tomorrow starts the hard part. He was right, Clara thought, as she locked the door behind him and returned to bed. They'd won a battle, but the war was just beginning, and Harold Grayson was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. But for tonight, wrapped in clean sheets in a city far from Deed Ridge, Clara let herself feel something she hadn't felt since receiving that telegram weeks ago. Hope. Hope, Clara discovered, was a fragile thing. It lasted exactly until dawn, when she was jolted awake by shouting in the street below and the sound of breaking glass. She scrambled to the window, derringer in hand, and looked down to see 3 men on horseback circling the boarding house. They weren't Grayson's rough mine workers. These were professional gunmen, the kind who wore their violence like expensive suits. Cole burst through her door without knocking, already dressed and armed. "They found us," he said tersely. "Get your things. We're leaving. Now." "How did they know we were here?" "Does it matter?" Cole was already moving to the window, assessing escape routes. "Someone talked, or someone followed us, or Grayson has more reach than Montgomery thought. The why doesn't change what we have to do." More shouting from below and the Chinese woman's voice rising in sharp protest. Clara's stomach clenched. The woman had protected them, and now she was paying the price. "We can't just leave her. She's smarter than both of us combined. She'll survive. We might not if we don't move." Cole grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her toward the door. "There's a back staircase that leads to the alley. If we're fast and lucky, we can make it to the street before they cover all the exits." They ran, Clara clutching her satchel with Elizabeth's evidence still inside. Cole leading the way down narrow stairs that creaked alarmingly under their weight. Behind them, heavy boots thundered up the main staircase. The gunmen had entered the building. The back door opened onto an alley that reeked of garbage and old cooking grease. Cole checked both directions, then pulled Clara left, away from the street where the horses waited. They'd made it perhaps 50 feet when a man stepped out from behind a stack of crates, gun already drawn. "Going somewhere, Miss Whitmore?" Cole's gun was up and firing before Clara could even process the threat. The shot echoed like thunder in the confined space. The gunman went down, but not before getting off a shot of his own that splintered wood inches from Clara's head. "Run!" Cole shouted, already moving. Clara ran, her boots slipping on wet cobblestones, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind them, more shouting. The other gunmen had heard the shots and were converging on their position. Cole yanked her around a corner and through a door that led into what looked like a laundry. Startled workers looked up from their washing, eyes wide with fear. "Federal business," Cole said, flashing something that might have been a badge or might have been a bluff. "Which way to the street?" A young Chinese man pointed wordlessly toward the front of the building. Cole nodded thanks and pulled Clara through steaming rooms full of hanging sheets and scalding water. They burst onto a busy street where morning traffic was already thick, wagons and horses, pedestrians going about their business, the normal chaos of a city waking up. Cole hailed a passing cab with the kind of authority that made the driver stop immediately. "Federal courthouse," he said, pushing Clara inside. "Fast as you can, and there's double your fare if you don't ask questions." The cab lurched into motion just as the gunmen emerged from the laundry. Clara saw them shouting, trying to commandeer horses from a hitching post, but the morning traffic slowed them down. "They'll follow," Clara said, her heart hammering. "They'll follow us right to Montgomery. That's the idea. Once we're inside that courthouse, they can't touch us without causing a scene Grayson can't afford. He might own territorial law, but federal property is different." Cole checked his gun, reloading with practiced efficiency. "Question is whether we can make it there before they catch up." The cab driver, to his credit, had taken the promise of double fare seriously. He wove through traffic with reckless skill, taking corners so fast that Clara had to brace herself against the door. Behind them, the gunmen were mounted now, pushing their horses through the crowded streets. They were gaining. "Driver, can this thing go any faster?" Cole called out. "Not without killing someone," the man shouted back. "There's a trolley up ahead. If we can get past it, we're 2 blocks from the courthouse." Clara looked back through the cab's rear window. The gunmen were close enough now that she could see their faces, see the grim determination in their expressions. These were men who wouldn't stop, who'd been paid well enough to risk everything. One of them raised his gun. "Get down!" Cole shoved Clara to the floor of the cab just as a shot shattered the rear window, spraying glass over them both. The cab swerved violently, the driver cursing. "They're shooting! I ain't dying for double fare!" "Triple," Cole said. returning fire through the broken window. "Just get us to those courthouse steps." Another shot, and this time Clara heard the driver cry out in pain. The cab slowed, drifting toward the side of the street. "I'm hit," the driver gasped. "Arm's no good." Cole cursed and climbed forward, grabbing the reins. "I've got it. Miss Whitmore, keep your head down and hold on." The next 2 blocks were chaos. Cole drove the cab like a madman, scattering pedestrians and other vehicles. The wounded driver slumped beside him, groaning in pain. The gunman stayed close, firing intermittently, but held back by the crowded streets and the risk of hitting innocent bystanders. Then the courthouse loomed ahead, its granite steps swarming with lawyers and clerks and citizens going about their business. Cole drove the cab straight up to the entrance, hauling on the reins so hard the horses screamed in protest. "Go!" he shouted to Clara. "Get inside and don't stop until you're in Montgomery's office." Clara scrambled out of the cab, her dress torn and bloody with the driver's blood, glass in her hair. She ran up the courthouse steps, pushing through startled onlookers. Behind her, she heard more shots, heard Cole's voice shouting something, heard the thunder of hooves on stone. She burst through the courthouse doors and nearly collided with a federal marshal who was coming down the stairs. "Help!" she gasped. "Outside, men with guns, they're trying to kill us!" The marshal's hand went to his weapon. "Who's trying to kill you?" "Harold Grayson's men. I'm Clara Whitmore. Judge Montgomery." He issued a warrant. Recognition flashed in the marshal's eyes. "You're the one from Deedridge, the poisoning case." He turned and shouted to other marshals in the building. "Active threat outside. Protect the witness." Everything happened very fast after that. Marshals poured out of the courthouse, guns drawn. Clara heard shouting, the whinny of frightened horses, and then silence. She stood in the courthouse lobby, shaking, until Cole appeared in the doorway. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his shirt torn, but he was alive and walking. "They're captured," he said. 3 of them alive, 1 wounded. They're not talking yet, but they will. A marshal came up behind him. "Judge Montgomery wants to see you both. Now." Montgomery's office looked different in daylight. Less imposing, more cluttered, but the judge himself looked exactly the same. Sharp, severe, and currently furious. "I told you to stay hidden," he said without preamble. "I told you Grayson was dangerous." "We did stay hidden," Clara protested. "They found us anyway." "Of course they did. Grayson has informants everywhere, including apparently in the federal courthouse." Montgomery's expression was grim. "One of my own clerks, a man I trusted, sent a telegram to Deedridge last night detailing everything you told me. Grayson had professional killers here by dawn." Clara felt sick. "Then he knows. He knows we have the evidence, knows about the warrant. He knows everything." Montgomery stood, pacing to the window. "Which means by now, he's either fled the territory or he's preparing a defense. Either way, this just became infinitely more complicated." "What about the children?" Clara demanded. "You said they'd be placed in protective custody. If Grayson knows about the warrant, I sent marshals at first light. They should be arriving in Deedridge within the hour." Montgomery turned back to face them. "But I won't lie to you, Miss Whitmore. If Grayson decides those children are liabilities, if he thinks they can testify against him—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, her mind racing. Thomas and Caroline alone in that house with a man who'd killed 4 women and would have no qualms about silencing his own children if it meant preserving his freedom. "We have to go back," she said. "We have to warn them." "You can't," Montgomery said firmly. "Grayson wants you dead. The moment you set foot in Deedridge, you'll be killed." "Then send more marshals, send an army. Just get those children out of that house." "I've sent everyone I can spare. But it's a full day's ride to Deedridge, and Grayson received his warning hours before my men left. If he's going to act against the children, he'll do it before help arrives." Cole had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he spoke up. "There's a telegraph office 2 blocks from here. Can we send a message to Deedridge, warn someone who might help?" Montgomery shook his head. "The telegraph operator there is on Grayson's payroll. Any message we send will go straight to him." "Then we send it to someone else." Clara stood, an idea forming. "Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper. She helped me escape. She promised to protect the children. If we can get a message to her somehow. How? Montgomery asked. Every official channel is compromised. Clara thought frantically, trying to remember everything Thomas had told her about Deedridge, about the people in town. And then she remembered something Elizabeth had written in her journal. "There's a minister," she said quickly. "Reverend Hayes." Elizabeth mentioned him. She said he was one of the few people in town who didn't seem afraid of Grayson. He ran a small church on the edge of town. Montgomery considered this. Religious men are harder to buy, and they have their own communication networks outside official channels. He moved to his desk, scribbling a message. "I can send this to the diocese in Cheyenne. They can relay it to Hayes through ecclesiastical channels that Grayson doesn't control. It might work. How long will that take?" Best case? The message reaches Hayes by this evening. He acts immediately, gets the children to safety before Grayson realizes what's happening. Montgomery looked at her seriously. Worst case, it's already too late. Claire refused to accept that. She couldn't accept it. "Send the message, please." Montgomery nodded and called for a clerk. A different one, Clara noted. Someone he apparently still trusted. The message was written, sealed, and sent within minutes. And then there was nothing to do but wait. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Montgomery arranged for Clara and Cole to stay in secure rooms within the courthouse itself, guarded by marshals who'd been personally vetted. The 3 gunmen who'd attacked them that morning were being interrogated, but so far they'd revealed nothing except that they'd been hired through intermediaries and paid in cash. No direct connection to Grayson could be proven. Clara spent the hours pacing, unable to eat or rest. Cole tried to distract her with conversation, with plans for the trial, with anything that might keep her mind from spiraling into dark possibilities. But nothing worked. She kept seeing Thomas's 2 old eyes, Caroline's hopeful smile. She kept imagining them in danger, kept thinking about how she'd promised to bring help, and instead might have brought disaster down on their heads. Evening came, and with it, a messenger from the telegraph office. Montgomery tore open the telegram with hands that weren't quite steady. He read it twice before speaking. "It's from Reverend Hayes," he said quietly. "He received our message. He's taken action." "The children?" Clara couldn't breathe. "Are they safe?" "He doesn't say, just that he's acted and will send further word when it's secure to do so." Montgomery set down the telegram. "We have to trust that he's gotten them out." Trust. Clara hated that word, hated how powerless it made her feel. But there was nothing else to do. Night fell. Montgomery went home, leaving instructions for the marshals to fetch him immediately if news arrived. Cole convinced Clara to at least try to sleep, though he clearly wasn't planning to do so himself. She saw him settle into a chair outside her door, gun resting on his lap, keeping watch like he had on the trail. Clara lay on a narrow cot in a windowless room deep in the courthouse and stared at the ceiling. She prayed, though she wasn't sure she believed anyone was listening. She made bargains with fate, with the universe, with any power that might exist. She promised that if the children were safe, she'd do anything, be anything, sacrifice whatever was asked. Please, she thought, please let them be all right. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to Cole shaking her shoulder gently. Daylight was streaming under the door. "There's news," he said. "Montgomery just arrived. You need to come hear this." Clara scrambled up, not bothering to fix her hair or smooth her rumpled dress. She followed Cole to Montgomery's office, where the judge was standing with another man, tall, thin, wearing dusty travel clothes and a minister's collar. Reverend Hayes. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice gentle but tired. "I'm glad to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "The children," Clara said immediately. "Thomas and Caroline, are they—" "They're safe. Frightened, confused, but safe. I have them with me." The relief was so overwhelming that Clara actually swayed on her feet. Cole's hand on her arm steadied her. "Where?" she managed to ask. "How did you get them out?" Hayes sank into a chair, looking exhausted. "Your message arrived yesterday evening. I went to the Grayson house immediately, claiming I needed to speak with the children about their religious education, something Elizabeth had arranged before she died, so it didn't seem suspicious. Mrs. Brennan let me in." He paused, accepting a glass of water from Montgomery. The children were upstairs in their rooms. Grayson was in his study with several men I didn't recognize. The atmosphere in that house was wrong, tense, dangerous. Mrs. Brennan whispered to me that Grayson had been in a fury since receiving a telegram that morning, that he'd sent away most of the servants, that she was afraid. Clara's hands clenched into fists. She'd been right to worry. I went upstairs, Hayes continued, spoke with the children and told them I was taking them to the church for evening services. Thomas understood immediately. I could see it in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, knew they needed to leave. He helped Caroline pack a few things while I went downstairs to inform Grayson. He let you take them? Montgomery asked, surprised. He didn't have much choice without revealing his intentions. How would it look if he refused to let his children attend church services, especially with a guest in the house, and Mrs. Brennan witnessing the conversation? So he agreed, but he said they needed to return immediately after. I promised they would. Hayes's expression hardened. Instead, I put them in my wagon and drove straight out of town. We traveled all night, changing directions several times in case we were followed. By the time Grayson realized we weren't coming back, we were already past the county line. Did he send men after you? Cole asked. Probably. But I know back roads even Grayson's people don't, and I had a 12-hour head start. Hayes looked at Clara. The children asked about you constantly. Thomas wanted to know if you'd kept your promise, if you'd brought help. I told him you had. Can I see them? Clara asked. Please, I need to see that they're really all right. They're in a safe house 2 streets over, being looked after by members of my congregation. Hayes stood. I'll take you to them. But Miss Whitmore, you should know. They're traumatized. Caroline has barely spoken since we left, and Thomas, that boy has been carrying burdens no child should bear. They're going to need time to heal. I know, but first they need to be safe, really, permanently safe. Montgomery spoke up. As of this morning, I've granted Miss Whitmore temporary guardianship of both children, pending resolution of the case against Harold Grayson. They'll remain in federal protection until the trial. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much. The safe house turned out to be a modest home near a small church, guarded by 2 federal marshals who looked competent and alert. Hayes led Clara and Cole inside, where a kindly older woman was cooking breakfast in a warm kitchen that smelled of bread and bacon. And sitting at the kitchen table, looking small and lost, were Thomas and Caroline. Caroline saw Clara first. The girl's face crumpled, and she ran across the room, throwing herself into Clara's arms with such force they both nearly fell over. You came back, Caroline sobbed into Clara's shoulder. You came back like you promised. Of course I did, sweetheart. Of course I did. Clara held the girl tight, feeling her small body shake with tears that had probably been held back for too long. Thomas stood more slowly, his expression carefully controlled. But when Clara reached out her other arm to him, he came, pressing against her side like he was trying to convince himself she was real. Is it over? He asked quietly. Is Papa going to jail? Not yet, Clara said honestly. But soon. Judge Montgomery issued a warrant. Federal marshals are looking for your father right now. What if they don't find him? What if he runs away? Then they'll keep looking until they do. And in the meantime, you and Caroline are safe. I won't let anyone hurt you. Thomas looked up at her with those 2 wise eyes. Mrs. Brennan told us Papa killed our mothers. All of them. She said Mama Elizabeth found proof. Clara's throat tightened. I'm so sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry you had to learn that. I already knew. I just didn't want Caroline to know. He glanced at his sister, still clinging to Clara. Is she going to be okay? The fact that an 11-year-old was asking that question, worrying about his sister's well-being instead of his own, broke Clara's heart. She's going to be okay. You both are. I promise you. They stayed like that for a long moment, the 3 of them holding on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Eventually, the woman cooking breakfast gently suggested the children should eat, and Clara reluctantly let them go. She watched them settle at the table, saw how Thomas automatically served Caroline first, how he checked her food before letting her eat it, habits learned from living with a poisoner. It would take time to unlearn that vigilance, to trust that food could be just food and not a weapon. Cole touched her elbow gently. We should let them rest. Montgomery wants to talk strategy. Clara nodded, but before she could leave, Thomas called out, Aunt Clara, will you come back later? Every day, she promised. Every single day until this is over and beyond. Back at the courthouse, Montgomery had news. The marshals had reached Deedridge and searched Grayson's house. He's gone, Montgomery said grimly. Fled sometime in the night after Hayes took the children. The house was nearly empty, most of the servants dismissed, personal items packed and removed. Mrs. Brennan is the only one who remained, and she's been taken into protective custody as a witness. Where would he go? Clara asked. That's the question. He has money, connections, resources. He could be anywhere from San Francisco to New York by now. Montgomery spread a map on his desk. But he also has assets he can't easily liquidate, the mine, properties, business interests. My guess is he'll try to fight this from a distance, hire lawyers to challenge the warrant, use his influence to discredit the evidence. Can he do that? He can try, and with enough money and the right connections, he might succeed. Montgomery looked at Clara seriously. Which is why we need more than physical evidence. We need testimony. We need witnesses who can speak to what happened in that house, who can corroborate what's in those documents. Mrs. Brennan will testify. So will I. And I can testify to his attempts to recapture Miss Whitmore, Cole added, to the gunmen he hired, the threats he made. It's a start. But what we really need is to find Grayson himself and bring him to trial. Until he's in custody, he's a threat. Montgomery paused. There's something else. When the marshals searched the house, they found the locked room in the basement that Elizabeth wrote about in her journal. Clara's stomach clenched. And? It's worse than we thought. Not just poisons, but detailed records going back 15 years. Evidence of other deaths beyond the 4 wives we knew about. Workers at the mine who died under suspicious circumstances. A business partner who opposed Grayson's expansion. All of it documented with the same clinical precision he used for the wives. The scope of it was staggering. Harold Grayson wasn't just a wife murderer. He was a serial killer who'd been operating with impunity for over a decade. How many? Clara whispered. At least a dozen that we can confirm. Possibly more. Montgomery's expression was haunted. Your sister stumbled onto something much bigger than she realized. And if Grayson escapes justice... He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. If Grayson escaped, he'd kill again. It was what he did, what he'd always done. The only question was who would be next. Then we find him, Clara said firmly. Whatever it takes, we find him, and we make sure he pays for every single life he's taken. Montgomery nodded slowly. I've contacted federal marshals across the territory. Every train station, every port, every border crossing is being watched. Grayson's face is being circulated to law enforcement from here to the East Coast. It's only a matter of time before someone spots him. But time, Clara thought, was exactly what they might not have. Every day Grayson remained free was another day he could plan, scheme, use his wealth and connections to slip through their fingers permanently. She looked at Cole, saw the same thought reflected in his eyes. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But they had the children safe. They had the evidence. They had allies willing to fight. And Clara Whitmore, who'd been sent west as a convenient replacement for a murdered sister, had discovered she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had ever imagined. Harold Grayson had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed Clara would be as easy to kill as the others. He was about to learn just how wrong he'd been. The weeks that followed became a strange kind of waiting game. Clara stayed in Denver with the children, moving between the safe house and Montgomery's courthouse office, watching as the federal case against Harold Grayson built like a storm gathering on the horizon. The evidence from Elizabeth's hidden box had been authenticated, cross-referenced with medical records and death certificates that told their own damning story. Mrs. Brennan had given a deposition that painted a picture of systematic murder disguised as natural causes. The doctor who'd signed Elizabeth's death certificate suddenly remembered details he'd been paid to forget. But Grayson himself remained a ghost. Sightings came in from across the territory. Someone matching his description seen boarding a train in Cheyenne, spotted in a San Francisco hotel, glimpsed at a Denver bank. Each lead evaporated under investigation. The man had resources Clara couldn't begin to imagine, and he was using every single one to stay ahead of the law. Thomas and Caroline slowly began to unfold from the tight fearful shells they'd built around themselves. Caroline started speaking more, asking questions about what would happen to them, whether they'd have to go back to the house in Deedridge. Thomas watched everything with wary intelligence, still protective of his sister, but gradually accepting that Clara wasn't going to disappear or betray them. One evening, 3 weeks after Hayes had brought them to Denver, Thomas found Clara sitting on the porch of the safe house, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Can I ask you something?" he said, settling beside her with the careful deliberation of someone much older. "Always." "What happens if they never find Papa? If he just disappears forever?" Clara had been asking herself the same question. "Then we move forward anyway. You and Caroline will stay with me. We'll make a life somewhere safe, somewhere he can't reach you. But he'll always be out there, always looking over our shoulders. Maybe. Or maybe he'll decide staying hidden is more important than revenge." Clara didn't entirely believe this, but she wanted to offer the boy some hope. "Either way, you won't be alone. I promise to protect you, and I keep my promises." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mama Elizabeth used to say that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just keep living when everything tells you to give up. I didn't understand what she meant, but I think I'm starting to." Clara pulled him close, this child who'd been forced to become wise beyond his years. "Your mama was a remarkable woman, and you're going to be a remarkable man, Thomas. Despite everything he did, despite everything you've been through. Will you tell me about her? About when you were both young, before any of this happened?" So Clara did. She talked about growing up in Philadelphia, about Elizabeth teaching her to read by candlelight when their father was too drunk to notice, about Elizabeth defending her against neighborhood bullies, about secret languages they invented, about dreams they'd shared of lives that would be different from their mother's constant fear and their father's rage. Caroline came out to listen, curling up on Clara's other side, and together they built a picture of Elizabeth that had nothing to do with Harold Grayson or Deedridge or death. They remembered her as she'd been, brave and kind and full of hope that the world could be better than what she'd known. It was the first of many such conversations. Slowly, painfully, the children began to heal. But Clara's own healing would have to wait. Because 4 weeks after Grayson's disappearance, a telegram arrived at Montgomery's office that changed everything. Cole brought it to her at the safe house, his expression grim. They found him. Or rather, he found them. Clara's heart lurched. Where? Deedridge. He went back. It made no sense. Why would Grayson return to the one place where everyone knew his crimes, where federal marshals were waiting for any sign of him? Montgomery explained when they reached his office an hour later. He didn't just go back. He's making a stand. He's hired an army of private security, fortified his house, and he's challenging the federal warrant on technical grounds. Claims he has evidence that proves the documents you found were forgeries, that your sister was mentally unstable, that this entire case is a conspiracy to seize his assets. That's insane, Clara said. We have witnesses. We have proof. We have proof that will be contested by expensive lawyers arguing in front of judges who might be sympathetic to a wealthy businessman. Montgomery's face was lined with exhaustion. Grayson's betting that he can tie this up in court long enough for public interest to fade, for witnesses to recant or disappear, for the whole thing to become too complicated for anyone to pursue. So what do? We force his hand. The marshals are preparing to serve the arrest warrant by force if necessary. But Grayson's made it clear he won't come quietly. This could turn into a siege. Clara thought of the house she'd fled from, the beautiful gardens Elizabeth had tended, now transformed into a fortress. People could die. People will die if we let him continue operating, Cole said quietly. How many more workers will have accidents at his mine? How many more business partners will develop mysterious illnesses? How many more women will he marry and murder? He was right, Clara knew, but the thought of federal marshals storming that house, of gunfire and bloodshed, made her sick. There has to be another way, something that doesn't end in violence. Montgomery leaned back in his chair, studying her. What are you thinking? He wants me dead, right? That's why he hired those gunmen, why he's been so desperate to stop this case. Because I'm the one who found the evidence, the one who can testify to what I discovered. Where are you going with this, Miss Whitmore? Clara took a breath, the idea forming even as she spoke it. What if I went back? What if I offered to meet with him, to hear his side of the story? He might lower his guard, let me inside the fortress. And once I'm in, absolutely not, Cole said immediately. That's suicide. It's a calculated risk. If I'm wired with enough witnesses, if federal marshals are positioned nearby, if we plan this carefully, he'll kill you the moment he gets the chance, Cole interrupted. This is Harold Grayson we're talking about. The man who poisoned 4 wives and God knows how many other people. You think he's going to sit down for a civilized conversation? I think he's arrogant enough to believe he can convince me I'm wrong, that he can manipulate me the way he manipulated Elizabeth at first. Clara turned to Montgomery. You said yourself that we need to force his hand. This would do it. Either he agrees to meet, which gives us a chance to arrest him in a controlled situation, or he refuses, which makes him look guilty and strengthens our case. Montgomery considered this carefully. It's dangerous, potentially fatal, but it might work. He looked at Cole. What would you need to make this safe? Or as safe as possible? Cole's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger, but he answered. Marshals positioned around the property, someone inside the house if possible, a maid, a servant, anyone who could intervene if things go wrong. And Miss Whitmore wired with a recording device so everything Grayson says is documented. Recording devices aren't admissible in territorial court yet, Montgomery said. But they're admissible in federal court, and more importantly, they'd be evidence of intent if something happened to Miss Whitmore. Cole looked at Clara, his eyes dark with worry. You're sure about this? Because once you walk into that house, there may not be a way to get you out. Clara thought about Elizabeth, about those last desperate weeks when her sister had known she was dying but couldn't escape, about Thomas and Caroline, who deserved to grow up free from their father's shadow, about all the women who died because no one had stopped Harold Grayson when they had the chance. I'm sure, she said. The plan took 3 days to arrange. Montgomery sent a formal message to Grayson's lawyers, proposing a meeting between their client and Clara Whitmore to discuss a potential settlement. The message was carefully worded to suggest that Clara was having doubts, that the strain of the case was wearing on her, that she might be willing to reconsider her testimony in exchange for financial compensation and guaranteed safety. It was exactly the kind of weakness Grayson would believe in. Women, in his worldview, could always be bought or intimidated or broken. His response came within hours. He would meet with Miss Whitmore at his residence in Deedridge, alone, unarmed, no lawyers, no marshals, no witnesses. He's trying to control the situation, Cole said, reading the message over Clara's shoulder. Dictating terms to make you feel powerless. Then we let him think he's succeeded, Clara replied. I'll go alone, unarmed, just like he wants, but I'll have insurance he doesn't know about. The insurance was a small recording device, new technology that Montgomery had acquired from the federal government's investigative division. It was hidden in a locket that Clara wore around her neck, disguised as a mourning piece that no one would think to examine too closely. A federal marshal named Sarah Chen, who'd worked undercover in mining camps, would pose as a new housemaid. Grayson had been hiring staff to replace the ones who'd fled, and one more servant wouldn't raise suspicion. Cole insisted on being part of the operation, despite Montgomery's concerns about his personal involvement. He'd be positioned with the marshals surrounding the property, ready to move in if Clara signaled distress. The night before Clara was scheduled to leave for Deedridge, she sat with Thomas and Caroline in the safe house, trying to find words to explain what she was about to do. You're going to see him, aren't you? Thomas said before she could speak. Papa? There was no point in lying. Yes, but I'm going to be very careful, and there will be people protecting me. He'll try to kill you. Thomas's voice was flat, factual. That's what he does to people who threaten him. I know, but this time people are ready for it. This time he won't get away with it. Caroline climbed into Clara's lap, something she hadn't done in weeks. I don't want you to go. What if you don't come back? Clara held her tight, breathing in the scent of the soap they'd used on her hair, trying to memorize this moment. I'm coming back. I promised you both I would keep you safe, and I can't do that if Harold Grayson is still free. So I'm going to make sure he's stopped, and then we're going to build a life together, the 3 of us, somewhere beautiful and safe. Where? Caroline asked. Wherever you want. We could go back east or we could stay out here. We could buy a small ranch, raise horses. We could live in a city, go to museums and theaters. The world is open to us now, sweetheart. We just have to get through this one last thing. Thomas moved closer, his hand finding Clara's. Mama Elizabeth used to say that sometimes you have to walk through fire to reach the other side. She said being afraid doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Being brave means walking through anyway. Your mama was a very wise woman. She'd be proud of you, Thomas said quietly, for not running away, for fighting back. Clara blinked back tears. I'm fighting for her, for all of you, and I'm going to win. The journey to Deedridge took a full day by train and coach. Clara traveled with 2 federal marshals disguised as fellow passengers, while Cole and the main force went ahead to set up positions around Grayson's property. The recording device in her locket felt impossibly heavy, like it might drag her down with the weight of everything riding on it. When the coach finally pulled into Deedridge as the sun was setting, Clara was struck by how different the town felt. Where before it had seemed prosperous and thriving, now there was a palpable tension in the air. People hurried about their business without meeting each other's eyes. Shops closed early. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Grayson's house loomed at the end of its private drive, exactly as Clara remembered it. But now there were armed guards at the gate, men with rifles who checked her identification before allowing her to pass. The gardens Elizabeth had loved were overgrown, untended. The house itself looked darker somehow, as if the evil inside had begun to seep through the walls. Mrs. Brennan met her at the door. The housekeeper's face was carefully neutral, but Clara saw relief flash in her eyes when their gazes met. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Grayson is expecting you in his study. How is he? Clara asked quietly as they walked through the familiar hallways. Confident, certain he's going to win. Mrs. Brennan's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He's been drinking more than usual, which makes him unpredictable. Be careful. They reached the study door. Mrs. Brennan knocked once, then stepped aside. Come, Grayson's voice called from inside. Clara took a breath, her hand touching the locket at her throat, making sure the recording device was positioned correctly. Then she opened the door and stepped into the room where so many of Harold Grayson's evil plans had been laid. He stood by the window, backlit by the dying sun, a glass of brandy in his hand. For a moment, Clara was struck by how normal he looked. This was a monster who'd murdered at least a dozen people, who'd terrorized his own children, who'd built an empire on blood and lies. But he just looked like a wealthy, middle-aged man in an expensive suit. That was the horror of it. Evil didn't always announce itself with fangs and claws. Sometimes it wore respectability like armor. Miss Whitmore, Grayson said, turning to face her. How kind of you to accept my invitation. Mr. Grayson. Claire remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her to hide their shaking. Please sit. Can I offer you something to drink? The irony of Harold Grayson offering her a drink was so absurd that Clara almost laughed. No, thank you. I'd prefer to keep this brief. Of course, you must be wondering why I asked you here. He moved to his desk, settling into his chair with the easy authority of someone completely in control. I wanted to give you an opportunity to reconsider this unfortunate situation before it becomes even more complicated. Unfortunate situation? Is that what you call murdering my sister? I call it a tragic misunderstanding based on fabricated evidence and the hysterical accusations of unstable women. Grayson's voice was smooth, practiced. Your sister, God rest her soul, suffered from mental illness. The documents you claim to have found are forgeries, created either by her and her delusions or by someone seeking to damage my reputation. And the other wives, Jane and Margaret, were they delusional too? Jane died in childbirth, a common tragedy. Margaret left of her own accord. I have witnesses who can attest to seeing her board a train east. He leaned forward slightly. Miss Whitmore, I understand you're grieving. Grief can make people believe things that aren't true, see patterns where none exist. But you're a reasonable woman. Surely you can see that these accusations are absurd. Clara felt rage building in her chest, but forced herself to stay calm. This was what she needed. Grayson confident, talking freely, condemning himself with every word. I found poison in your basement, records of purchases, experiments, effects. which anyone could have planted. My home has been invaded by marshals who clearly had an agenda. Evidence can be fabricated, Miss Whitmore. Surely you're sophisticated enough to understand that. And the payoffs? The ledger showing money given to the doctor, the sheriff, the undertaker. Business expenses, charitable donations, normal transactions twisted to look sinister by people who want to believe the worst. Grayson stood, moving around the desk toward her. Clara forced herself not to step back. Here's what I'm proposing, he continued. You recant your testimony. You admit that you were mistaken, that grief clouded your judgment. In return, I'll provide you with a generous settlement, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You can go back east, start over, forget any of this ever happened. And if I refuse? Something cold flickered in Grayson's eyes. Then I'll be forced to defend myself more, aggressively. I have lawyers who will destroy your credibility, Miss Whitmore. They'll paint you as a fortune hunter, a liar, possibly as disturbed as your sister. By the time they're finished, no one will believe a word you say. You mean you'll do to me what you did to Elizabeth, discredit me, isolate me, and then kill me? I've never killed anyone. But Grayson's smile was terrifying. Though accidents do happen, particularly to young women who put themselves in dangerous situations. Claire's hand moved to her locket, a nervous gesture that Grayson clearly interpreted as fear. Good. Let him think she was weakening. I know what you did, she said quietly. I know you poisoned Elizabeth and the others. I know about the workers at the mine, the business partner who opposed your expansion. I know everything, Mr. Grayson, and so do the federal authorities. Prove it. The mask of civility slipped, revealing the predator beneath. You have forged documents and the testimony of servants who can be bought or intimidated. You have the ravings of a dead woman who was clearly mentally unstable. What you don't have is actual proof of any crime. I have Elizabeth's journal, in her own handwriting, documenting everything. The journal of a madwoman, inadmissible in any court that matters. I have Mrs. Brennan's testimony. A disgruntled employee who was dismissed for theft. Her word against mine. Who do you think will be believed? I have the children. Your own son knows what you are. Grayson's expression darkened dangerously. Thomas is a confused boy who's been manipulated by people seeking to use him against me. No court will allow a child to testify against his father based on lies fed to him by outsiders. Then I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I saw, everything I found. And I'll have you declared incompetent, the grief-stricken sister, so desperate for someone to blame for her beloved Elizabeth's death that she invented an elaborate conspiracy. Grayson moved closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. You're alone, Miss Whitmore. You have no power here. The sooner you accept that, the better things will go for you. I'm not alone, and I'm not powerless. No? Grayson laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You're in my house, surrounded by my men, at my mercy. Your federal marshals can't help you here. Montgomery's warrant is a piece of paper I can challenge in court for years. And you, he reached out, touching her face with fingers that made Clara's skin crawl. You're just another woman who thought she could oppose me and win. This was it. This was what she needed. Clara let herself show fear now, real and honest, because fear would make him overconfident. What are you going to do to me? She whispered. What I've done to everyone who threatened me. I'm going to make you disappear. Grayson's hand moved to her throat, not squeezing but resting there like a promise. Another tragic accident. Perhaps you'll fall from a window, distraught over your sister's death. Or maybe you'll simply vanish on the road back to Denver, victim of bandits who are never found. The specific method doesn't matter. What matters is that you'll no longer be a problem. You're confessing to murder. I'm speaking hypothetically to a woman who won't live long enough to repeat our conversation. His fingers tightened slightly. Did you really think I'd let you walk out of here alive? Did you think I was fool enough to believe you came here to negotiate? Clara grabbed his wrist, her other hand going to the locket. I think you're a fool who's been talking for 10 minutes while a recording device captured every word. Grayson's face went white with shock, then purple with rage. He jerked back, reaching for something in his desk drawer. A gun. But Clara was faster. She ripped the locket from her neck and threw it through the study window, shattering the glass. It was the signal they'd agreed on, the sign that she was in immediate danger. Grayson's gun was out now, pointed directly at her chest. You think that matters? You think anyone will reach you in time? I think you've already lost, Clara said, backing toward the door. Everything you said is recorded, everything you admitted, and federal marshals are surrounding this house right now. As if summoned by her words, shouts erupted from outside. The sound of running footsteps, barked orders, the thunder of many men converging on the house. Grayson's hand shook as he aimed the gun. If I'm going down, you're coming with me. The study door burst open. Cole stood there, his own gun drawn, his eyes taking in the situation instantly. Put the gun down, Grayson. It's over. It's not over until I say it's over. Grayson swung the gun toward Cole, and in that moment of diverted attention, Clara lunged for the desk, grabbing the heavy ledger that sat on it and throwing it at Grayson's head. It connected with a solid thunk. Grayson stumbled back, the gun discharging wildly, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling. Cole was on him in an instant, knocking the weapon from his hand, forcing him to the ground. Federal marshals poured into the room, weapons drawn. One of them moved to help Cole secure Grayson, snapping handcuffs onto the struggling man's wrists. Another helped Clara, who'd collapsed against the wall, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Are you hurt? The marshal asked. It was Sarah Chen, the woman who'd gone undercover as a maid. No, I'm all right. Clara looked at Grayson, now handcuffed and surrounded by marshals, still struggling and shouting about his lawyers and his rights and how they couldn't treat a man of his standing this way. But they could, and they were. Cole crossed to Clara, his hands gentle as he checked her for injuries. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. Did the recording work? Did it capture everything? Every word. Montgomery's people already have it. Even Grayson's expensive lawyers won't be able to explain away a confession like that. Clara started to laugh, or maybe cry. She wasn't sure which. Relief and terror and triumph all crashed over her at once, leaving her shaking uncontrollably. It's over, she whispered. It's really over. Cole pulled her into his arms, holding her steady as federal marshals led Harold Grayson out of the study, out of his house, away from the life of unchallenged power he'd built on the bones of his victims. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway, her face wet with tears. Miss Clara, you did it. You stopped him. We did it, Clara corrected, all of us together. The trial took place 2 months later in Judge Montgomery's federal courthouse. Grayson's lawyers fought hard, challenging every piece of evidence, attacking Clara's credibility, painting their client as a victim of a conspiracy. But the recording of his confession was damning beyond dispute, and when combined with the physical evidence from the basement, Mrs. Brennan's testimony, and the medical records of too many suspicious deaths, the case became ironclad. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. 4 counts of murder in the first degree, multiple counts of attempted murder, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Judge Montgomery sentenced Harold Grayson to death by hanging. Clara wasn't there for the execution 6 months later. She was done watching Harold Grayson take up space in the world. Instead, she was on a train heading west with Thomas, Caroline, and Ethan Cole, traveling toward a new life in a place where Grayson's shadow couldn't reach. They'd chosen a small valley in Montana, far from mining towns and the memories of Deedridge. Cole had used reward money from Grayson's capture to purchase a modest ranch. Nothing grand, but honest and theirs. The house was simple but sturdy, with windows that looked out on mountains and meadows where horses could run. Thomas had started smiling again, tentatively at first, but with growing frequency. He'd taken to ranching with surprising enthusiasm, spending hours with Cole learning how to care for the horses, how to mend fences, how to build things instead of watching them slowly die. Caroline had nightmares less often now. She'd started painting, creating bright landscapes that bore no resemblance to the dark house she'd grown up in. She'd made friends with children from the neighboring ranch, had learned to laugh without looking over her shoulder first. And Clara had discovered that surviving was different from living, but that with time and safety and love, one could transform into the other. On a warm evening in late spring, she sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching Cole teach Thomas how to break a young horse. The boy's face was alight with concentration and joy, and when the horse finally accepted his touch, his whoop of triumph echoed across the valley. Caroline came running from the house, her latest painting clutched in her hands. "Aunt Clara, look! I painted our family!" The painting showed 4 figures in front of a house: a woman with short dark hair, a man with a gentle smile, and 2 children, all of them holding hands. Above them, a 5th figure painted in soft, translucent colors, a woman with long dark hair and kind eyes, watching over them. "That's Mama Elizabeth," Caroline explained. "I wanted her to see how happy we are." Clara pulled the girl close, her throat tight with emotion. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. And yes, I think she can see. I think she knows." Cole and Thomas finished with the horse and came to join them, settling onto the porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. They sat together in comfortable silence, a family not bound by blood or law, but by choice and survival and love. Somewhere far away, in a prison courtyard in Denver, Harold Grayson had met his end. The newspapers had covered it extensively. The wealthy mine owner brought low, justice finally served, a cautionary tale about the limits of money and power. But here, on a ranch in Montana, 4 people who'd survived his cruelty were building something he could never understand. They were building a life based on honesty and kindness, on second chances and chosen family, on the radical notion that people deserve to live without fear. Thomas looked up at Clara, his young face serious. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't run? If you'd married him like they wanted?" Clara considered the question. "Sometimes, but not as much anymore. What matters isn't what almost happened, it's what did happen. We survived. We got out. We're free." "Because you were brave," Caroline said. "Because a cowboy stepped in and said, 'That's not right,'" Clara corrected, smiling at Cole. "Because Mrs. Brennan helped me escape. Because Reverend Hayes got you to safety. Because Judge Montgomery believed us. Because all of us refused to let evil win just because it wore an expensive suit." Cole reached over, taking her hand in his. Over the past months, their relationship had shifted from allies to something deeper. He'd asked her to marry him last week, not because she needed his protection anymore, but because they'd both discovered that surviving together was better than surviving alone. Clara had said yes, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Not because the world demanded it, but because her heart did. "Mama Elizabeth would have liked you," Thomas said to Cole. It was the highest compliment the boy could give. "I wish I could have met her," Cole replied quietly. "She must have been extraordinary." "She was," Clara said, "and she made sure we'd all be okay, even after she was gone. Every piece of evidence she left, every risk she took to document the truth, she did it so that someday someone would stop him, so that other women wouldn't suffer what she suffered." "She saved us," Caroline said simply, and maybe that was the truest thing of all. Elizabeth had saved them, not by surviving, but by making sure her death meant something, by leaving breadcrumbs that led to justice, by believing, even in her darkest hours, that someone would come along and follow them to the truth. Clara had been sent west to replace her sister, to step into a life that had been purchased with blood and lies. But a cowboy had stepped in and said that wasn't right, and together they'd turned a forced marriage into a chosen family, a death sentence into a new beginning. The past couldn't be changed. Elizabeth was still gone, along with Jane and Margaret and all the others Grayson had murdered. But the future was wide open, stretching out before them like the Montana sky, vast and beautiful, and theirs to shape however they chose. Years passed. The ranch prospered. Thomas grew into a man who carried his father's name but none of his cruelty, who used his intelligence to build rather than destroy. Caroline became an artist whose paintings of Montana landscapes hung in galleries from San Francisco to New York, each one capturing the light that came after darkness. Clara and Cole built a life together based on partnership and respect, raising the children they'd saved and eventually children of their own. They never returned to Deedridge. The town eventually faded after the mine closed, becoming another ghost town in the hills where no one remembered Harold Grayson except as a cautionary tale. But they never forgot Elizabeth. On the anniversary of her death each year, Clara would sit with the children and tell stories of her sister, the real her, the brave woman who'd fought back the only way she could, who'd refused to die quietly, who'd made sure the truth survived even when she didn't. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the valley, Claire would look up at the mountains and feel certain that Elizabeth was there somehow, watching over the family she'd saved with her courage and her sacrifice. The sentence she never chose had been broken. The life stolen from her had been transformed into lives lived freely, fully, without fear. Harold Grayson had tried to erase Elizabeth Whitmore, to make her disappear as if she'd never existed. Instead, she'd ensured he'd be the one forgotten while she lived on in the people she'd saved and the justice she'd made possible. That was the truest victory of all. Not just that evil had been stopped, but that love and courage had proven stronger than poison and power. Clara Whitmore had come west as a replacement, a convenience, a woman with no choices. She'd become something Harold Grayson never imagined possible. A woman who chose her own future, who built her own family, who survived and thrived, and showed the world that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept the sentence others impose on you. Elizabeth had started the fight, Clara had finished it, and together they'd proven that even in a world built to silence women, the truth could still be heard if someone was brave enough to speak it. The ranch in Montana became a sanctuary, a place where anyone fleeing danger could find shelter and safety. Word spread quietly through networks of women helping women, and over the years, dozens found their way to Clara's door. Each one received protection, resources, and a fierce defender who understood exactly what it meant to run from a life that would kill you. On a clear autumn day, 20 years after Harold Grayson's execution, Clara stood in the same spot where she'd watched the sunset with her family all those years ago. Thomas was married now, running his own ranch with his wife and 3 children. Caroline had a gallery in San Francisco, but visited often, bringing stories and paintings and the warmth that had always defined her. Cole stood beside Clara, gray now at the temples, but still strong, still steady, still the man who'd said that's not right when the world needed someone to speak up. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Everything you went through, everything you risked?" Clara thought about that telegram she'd received so long ago, about the train journey west, about the yellow room in the gardens, and the moment she'd discovered Elizabeth's journal. She thought about fear and courage, about running and fighting back, about all the women who'd come to her ranch seeking the same freedom she'd found. "Not for a second," she said. "Elizabeth's death would have meant nothing if I'd accepted the life they planned for me. This way it meant everything. It changed everything." She looked out at the valley, at the home they'd built, at the lives they'd saved, and she knew with absolute certainty that every risk had been worth it. Because some sentences are meant to be broken. Some lives are meant to be chosen, not assigned. And sometimes, when the whole world says you have no power, the bravest thing you can do is prove them wrong. Clara Whitmore had done exactly that. And in doing so, she'd built a legacy that would outlast any mansion, any mine, any monument to wealth and power. She'd built a legacy of freedom, of choice, of women helping women survive and thrive. That was the sentence she'd chosen for herself. And it was the one she'd keep writing until the very end.